tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be with you. I'm Mario Picazo, meteorologist, lecturer, also focused in the world of climate change and sustainability, crucial topics, both. And I had no idea when I came to Madrid, because I'm not living in Madrid anymore, that on October 18th it would be 30 degrees in Madrid. And this is probably the highest temperature recorded ever on October 18th. Temperatures like this were only achieved in 1930 once in Madrid. And so we're really having record high temperatures here, not just in Madrid, because in the south of Spain it's 35 to 40 degrees. And of course, October is supposed to be a rainy month in most parts of Spain. And in Madrid, it tends to rain as well, quite a lot. And I'm sorry to start speaking about the weather, but it is my profession. But tomorrow there will be a change in the weather and it will rain and get cooler. But it strikes me because the weather we're experiencing today is because we're living in a new climate due to human activity and the way we are behaved. But let's get to our behaving. But let's get to the point. Welcome to the 2022 Sustainability Seminar. It's hosted by Redella. It's a business group which includes Red Eléctrica, Red Intel, also Ispasat, and the last company in the group, Irwit. And it's a business group which works mostly focused on the energy transition, which is such a crucial transition we need to drive as quickly as we can. And the company's business also has to do with telecommunications, which is also a very important driver for growth for our societies because it improves connectivity. And Redella, for quite a few years now, has been growing in this field and is becoming one of the leading companies in this field of sustainability. What Redella has been doing is to host these seminars in order to encourage us all to think for a minute together to discuss matters openly. And of course, we are undergoing a period of tremendous social and economic transformation globally, but we need to reflect on social, environmental, and also governance challenges which we will be facing in the next years, and also to build together a sustainable future. That's crucial, not just in terms of businesses and governments, but also individually ourselves. That's also an important contribution because you know that when talking about sustainability, each little bit counts. And to start our session today, we're going to hear some words of welcome from our hostess, the chairwoman of Redella, Beatriz Corredor. And so I would like to ask her to come up here to the podium and begin her welcome speech. Thank you very much.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mario. And welcome all to this second Redella Sustainability Seminar. It's also the first time we hosted under our new brand and our new corporate image, which is that of a group with a very clear purpose, which is to guarantee electricity supply and connectivity through telecommunications from our position of neutrality and independence, whilst trying to guarantee territorial and social cohesion and contribute to digital and energy transition. So that's what all the companies in the group are doing. And I'd like to begin by thanking all the speakers and panelists who have accepted our invitation this afternoon. Also those who initially accepted very happily, but then unfortunately, because of the tremendous uncertainties we are experiencing right now, they found it impossible to join us. And let me remember one of the people who were the first to confirm their participation in this seminar, Emilio Ontiveros, a close friend of mine for many years. And I assure you, he's one of the first to enthusiastically accept our invitation. And that was, of course, tremendous loss not to have him here today. And I want to thank Afi for having helped us to keep his presence virtually in this seminar, with the last panel session today. And I also want to thank our technicians for making it possible for everyone to follow this in person, but also via streaming online. And I want to thank all the REDEA teams, all the marketing and brand teams, the secretary of the board, and all the executives and experts who have made this possible. I can assure you that there's a lot of work that goes into organizing a seminar like this. And of course, today, energy has become a particularly pressing issue. And we're going to be talking a lot about energy because of the international context that we're experiencing. A year ago, when we presented the first of these seminars in October, we had just emerged from the pandemic. We were still in the post-pandemic period. We were beginning to see some light at the end of the tunnel after 2 very tough years. And a year ago, there was already some talk, particularly on the part of the government, and I want to greet the Director General, Manuel, about the need to reform the international electricity market, the European electricity market, to make it more efficient, separating the impact of the price of gas on electricity generation prices. And some of us felt that that was a very reasonable message from the government, and we repeated it, and a lot of people who were listening seemed rather skeptical. But then in December and then in spring, the Association of European Regulators was still rather skeptical about the obvious need to reform the European electric market and how electricity prices are calculated in Europe. But now the European Commission has put it at the top of its agenda, and no one questions that it's an inefficient market. We're talking about the need to also reform the reference European gas prices. Something that would have been unthinkable just a year ago, and it gives you an idea of the very rapid changes that we are experiencing and how quickly you need to adapt to changes which seemed impossible so recently. We're saying that we need to make sure that we promote a resilient, sustainable recovery. And I'd like to start by saying we cannot afford to make resilience and sustainable lose their meaning. We need to really understand the full significance of both terms, because our lives are actually at stake in that. And I think it's time to speak plainly about the necessary switch to ethical capitalism. It's not just about companies creating value for shareholders. It's not about companies creating value for society as a whole, whether members of that society are shareholders of ours or not. And that means qualitative change, because we are facing crucial transformations, and I'm just going to mention 4. Once, of course, the energy transformation, also the digital transformation I've already referred to. But we've also said that this transformation needs to be just, and it needs to be done with equity and guaranteeing gender equality. In terms of the energy transition, it's accelerated a great deal, and these days I constantly get asked to what extent environmental and economic sustainability are compatible. And it's not that they should be, that they can be compatible, they should be compatible, must be compatible. And now I think everyone's convinced that we need to move forward with that energy transformation more quickly. We have been bringing forward the targets. They're becoming more demanding and coming closer in time. And the companies and those of us who have responsibilities in the achievement of these targets need to lead these efforts. And I said that our lives are at stake. In Europe right now, we need to be to have full energy sovereignty, and that cannot be achieved unless we accelerate this energy and environmental transition. Spain and Portugal specifically, I think, for the first time in history, at the forefront of the European developments in this energy transition. We made a virtue out of necessity. We focused on developing renewable energy sources these last years, and a lot of other European countries now see us as a role model, and that's why we are now able to lead these changes in the European energy policies. We don't just need to change the energy mix and reduce the use of fossil fuels, particularly gas and oil, for energy generation, but we also have to make sure that the inclusion of renewable energy sources is done without leaving anyone behind and making sure that the quality of service does not suffer. Europe's energy independence will also mean the independence and survival of our way of life and our civilization. And that has equally to do with energy savings, energy efficiency, the incorporation of renewable energies, and increasing awareness by consumers. I think we should all understand very clearly how these actions are going to affect consumers, particularly the most vulnerable. And I'm sure that Manuel will tell us more about this later. But action has been taken to protect the most vulnerable consumers. There's also digital transformation. In the last 20 years, we have seen a tremendous acceleration in technology change. I was born in 1968. First year to be born, if you're a revolutionary. I always said that my generation was the one that had to adapt more quickly to the most brutal technology changes. When I was small, there was only one channel on television, and we had dial phones, and the highest technology in the university was the photocopying machine. And of course, now our civilization has had to adapt to technologies that we couldn't even imagine 5 years ago. And this transformation and adaptation should make us think about two things from my point of view. First, we cannot afford to leave anyone behind. The digital divide has a direct impact on equal opportunities in society. And second, new technology, which is unstoppable and which affect our lives at every level, has to have its limits. And to me, those limits lie in the privacy and protection of identity and freedom of choice and development of critical thought of all of our citizens. And those are affected by the way technology is used. Cybersecurity has to do with how we protect our countries, our critical infrastructures, our companies, and all of that has to be amongst the priorities of the digital transformation, and it affects businesses directly. And the transition has to be just, as I said. Social and territorial cohesion is something that a company like ours must always keep in mind. And it's not about, you cannot have economic profitability without social benefit. And we need to see corporate social responsibility not about a way to be forgiven for the wrongs that we do to society, but as a contribution that we make in a win-win setting for society. And we need to do it whilst keeping in mind the importance of gender equality and incorporating all the talent in our society. And in every crisis, we lose ground in women's rights. And McKinsey has said that companies that have over 30% women executives have a higher chance of being resilient through a crisis. And now the European Commission requires that in a few years, just a few, at least 40% of directors in listed companies have to be women. And I have quite a few directors, women directors in Redeia, and we made that target quite a long time ago. We were the first to have 50% women in our board. We also have 50% women in our exco, and we will make sure that it trickles down until all of our executives are fully diverse. And these are crucial changes, and we need to continue to make progress, although the threat of an economic recession, because of the use that Putin is making of energy as a weapon, is making it difficult. We're probably facing one of the most critical and tough winters for the EU, and also from a new paradigm where it's no longer about France's nuclear or Germany's industrial power fed by Russian gas, and we're moving to power generated by renewable sources from natural sources. And that has a lot to do with the topics we're going to talk about in this seminar. We're going to have 3 afternoons in which we're going to talk about the environment, the social part, and the governance part of this equation. And the environmental part, we'll talk about climate change, which of course is undeniable. One of our directors, who is going to join us later, Ricardo Garcia Herrera, who's also a physicist and was the head of the Spanish Meteorology Agency, and he told us that whatever we do now, nothing will change in the next 30 years. We already have the foundation so that nothing can be reverted in the next 30 years. So from what we do now will probably change the future of our children and grandchildren. And of course, they are our children and grandchildren. We can't leave them a worse world than when we found it. So that means that the economy and nature are necessarily linked. It's not just about protecting nature and biodiversity. It's about raw materials, commodities, food. All of these things are affected by climate change, and that clearly affects our survival. And then there's the social aspects with the inequality that always increases in a crisis, and increasingly there are international institutions like the World Economic Forum, which in its analysis of global risks has already identified political, technology and economic intergenerational inequality as one of the most serious challenges in the world. in the future. And that also has to do with labor, not just in terms of the necessary flexibility for remote work or for the use of technology in traditional workplaces, but also the skills that the workers of the future will require. I have heard and read often that 60% of future jobs don't exist yet. And so young people are training today without really knowing what their jobs will look like in the future, which means that, of course, they must acquire skills that are adaptable. And that means that we will require lifelong learning and training. It's not just about finishing your studies and then getting to work. It's about maintaining ongoing training in every field, in the law, which is mine, but also in medicine and every other field. And we need to think about how we want workers to interact with their companies. Even Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, has defined the relationship between the employer and the employee. We need to make sure that the teams are horizontal, that we understand hierarchy as sharing of responsibilities and not as a chain of command. And we need to think not just about the health and safety of our employees and their economic and employment rights, but also their emotional and mental health. Happy teams are more efficient teams. And I think right now, at least the younger generation, my eldest is 26, and she does not consider working for any company where employees are not given a chance to grow and to progress. And I also have the honor, talking about governance, of representing a company that has been a pioneer in a lot of actions, including, of course, diversity with the incorporation of women, also sustainability, where we created a sustainability committee before it became a requirement with the governance of sustainability. And I'd like to mention our corporate director, Fatima Rojas, who heads the sustainability governance structure, so that it goes down all the way from the board of directors down to the last employee of the company. And we have built an armored station, and the first thing that the technician who explained to us the equipment in that visit, first thing he said was the environmental impact and how it was going to affect our environmental compliance to replace a certain material with another when building these when insulating these transformer stations. So every last technician is focused on sustainability, and of course that's not just thanks to me. It's just something that the company has been working on for years, and it affects the way governance is defined in companies. And there's a metric which is published every year, which is the Edelman Confidence Barometer. And once again, that shows something that I find concerning, although so hopeful, which is that companies, together with NGOs, generate the most trust amongst citizens. Well, that's great, but it also means a tremendous responsibility for companies, because if we trust companies more than we do in liberal democracies and their institutions, we have a problem, because without a liberal democracy and their institutions, no company can be profitable and succeed. Companies cannot succeed in a failing society. And that's a quote, I can't remember who it was, but I have a terrible memory for names, but we do need to understand that our responsibility requires that we reconcile economic profitability with ethics, honesty, and a positive social impact in every aspect, not just the development of infrastructures and the way we treat our employees, but also how we finance ourselves. And that is, again, green finance, not talking about greenwashing, but truly making sure that socially responsible investment is what drives our activity, and that the finance we get in the market is green. And to do that, we need to have a relevant and clear position in sustainability indexes, which assess the real degree of compliance we have with sustainability in our activities. And all of that sounds great, but of course it's all set down in the sustainability plan that, dear directors, I hope you will see fit to approve on Tuesday. The 23-25 sustainability plan, which has a very relevant aim, which makes our management team very nervous, which is to link the sustainability plan with their bonus targets quantitatively. This is not just about a subjective assessment of performance. It's about quantitative and qualitative assessment, which is going to affect the remuneration of our executives. And we're going to do that in the 4 aspects that Redeia has defined as the priorities of our sustainability plan: decarbonization of the economy, supporting our value chain so that it follows the same sustainability standards that we have, our suppliers, contributing to the development of our communities, focusing on social development, and to try and anticipate future trends. And to do that, we have a research department which is now focused on anticipating 2050 and how all of our economic and energy activities might affect the future of the country, of the company, because we think that to be long-lived, it means to be sustainable, and to be sustainable, you need to serve society. Society does not reward those who do not serve it. And just to mention a few of the elements of the sustainability plan, there's 14, there's 87 targets. We will be carrying out over 100 different actions, but essentially, of course, we have our commitment towards reducing our carbon footprint by 2025. So that's just around the corner. We want to cut our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 30%, and we want 2/3 of our suppliers to have approved targets with scientifically validated criteria. And we're going to offset our 100% of our scope 1 emissions, particularly focusing on reforestation, not deforestating, but on reforestation. And in biodiversity, we have a specific commitment to the protection of birds, to marking all of our transmission lines with bird protecting elements, also to offset our impact in that area, to promote the circular economy with zero waste in our activities in Spain, leadership in diversity, as I've mentioned, and also, dear Manuel, to be a driver to help Spain achieve the targets of its national integrated climate plan, which is that 64% of our energy mix should be renewable. In 2021, it was almost 48%. And so we are on the right track, but we cannot stop. And to finish, of course, all of that without forgetting our impact on the local communities. And dear Roberto, our CEO, we've implemented, I think, a revolution in the way Redeia carries out its procedures, and that is to make sure no infrastructure is developed without us first testing on the ground the feeling, opinions, and needs of the community, the local communities, so that those infrastructures will contribute to their development and not be an obstacle that they will have to deal with in order to achieve a common goal, which is sustainability, which will not mean as much to them locally if we don't also help them to improve their lives. And this has been a radical change in the way we operate, and I want to thank the people in operations and transport who have done all the work to make sure the engineers and management all speak the same language so that we can have more beneficial impact on local communities. I think this seminar is going to be a very interesting one. There are some people who are going to help us think not just about technical engineering issues or more or less scientific issues, but also going to help us to think even philosophically. I think that's the real value of these meetings, to help us in Redeia understand the world in which we live in and the changes that are around the corner. And with that, I wish you a very fruitful seminar, and thank you once again for your presence and your attendance.
Muchas gracias, Cristina.
Thank you very much for Beatriz for your inspiring words. Yes, I nearly got your name wrong. I was thinking about the future speakers that we have today. So thank you. And by the way, we are streaming this seminar. It's being streamed live in Spanish original, also with English interpretation. It's a great way to follow this debate on sustainability. So Beatriz did raise a number of very important issues that we have to think about, debate about, and give our views on. We'll do that this afternoon, but right at the heart of that transformation, such an important transformation that Beatriz was talking to us about, that challenge that is ahead of us, there is one essential point, and she talked about it, energy and the ecological transition. And Spain is leading the way forward. It's very ambitious here with that transformation. Particularly, it is staking its commitment on renewable energies, particularly for electricity grid. For the formal opening of this seminar, we have, of course, the Ministry for the ecological transition and the demographic challenge, the best ministry possible to talk to us about the future. And we have the Director General for Energy Policy and Mines here with us, Manuel García Hernández. Please come up to the stage.
Muy buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Redea for hosting these extremely important days of seminars, and congratulations to the chairperson Beatriz Corredora on behalf of the ministry, and thank you for inviting our ministry to open up this 3-day event in which we will be talking about the importance of sustainable finances, about the responsibility of companies, and all of these social and environmental challenges ahead of us. Before getting into the nitty-gritty of the issue, I would like to say on behalf of the Minister, Teresa Ribera, that she would have loved to have been here, but unfortunately, because of a clash in her engagements diary, she hasn't been able to join us because she said, though, and she has been at the cabinet meeting this morning, but that she would like to say warm greetings to all of you and wish you the best of success. This year, this seminar is taking place against a complex backdrop, but you're not surprised about that, are you? The current circumstances are tricky, and more than ever before, we are seeing the importance of changing our model. We need to move towards a less energy-reliant model. We need to be decarbonized to ensure that energy is compatible with sustainability. This is a pressing challenge. The response to the climate change problem is something that we have to deal with. The evidence is more and more visible. You heard earlier that from Maria that this summer has been one of the hottest summer ever here in Spain. We've had 3 successive heat waves. This has, of course, led to the appearance of phenomena such as those raging wildfires and those forest fires and that drought which has been dragging on. Let's hope that we will finally get some rain falling here on the Iberian Peninsula the next few days, because the water reserves that we have in Spain are at lowest possible levels. Science has been telling us about these problems for a long time now. This is a global challenge, but we have to address it from a local level. And it also requires the local responsibility. So we are saying that this is not a frivolous challenge. We have to take this seriously. It affects so many parts of society, our life, our health, our education, agriculture, natural resources. So science and urgency have to be at the heart of the decisions we take politically. We have to do things quickly. We have to ensure that we do things in depth. And as agreed at the last COP meeting, use evidence. The ecological transition isn't exactly the same as the energy transition, but they are very much interlinked. And that is because energy is responsible for about 80% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And it's impossible, therefore, to have that ecological transition without the transformation of the energy system first. The ecological transformation and sustainability have a lot to do as well with the circular economy, biodiversity, the management of natural resources, with social equality. And that is why the plan or the program that you've put together is so important for this 3-day seminar. On top of that, we have a current energy model highly dependent on fossil fuels, and it is being used now to blackmail us. We're seeing that there is this weaponization of natural gas currently. That is why this energy crisis cannot be an excuse to slow down the ecological transition. Quite the opposite. I believe that this energy transition is the key driver for decarbonization, and to stop us being so reliant on fossil fuels, and to make sure that we can no longer be blackmailed in energy terms, as is happening in Europe now. And it has led to what I call a false dilemma. We are not in that weak position in some European countries because we have committed too soon or too much to this transition. It's quite the opposite. This weak position in this reliance that we have on those energy sources could have been mitigated if our commitment to climate change and this transition was great in the past. Just as the chairperson said before, this transition has to be fair, it has to be just. It is a structural transformation, and of course, the digital transformation, and this also comes under RIDEA, is an industrial revolution, another one, and it will have costs and it will have benefits, and those benefits we believe will be much greater than the cost. But the share out of those benefits need to be balanced. There shouldn't be one single sector, territory, or group that benefits from them. So I would say we need to bring in the public sector to ensure that the benefits are equally distributed. There is equity. The rising prices caused by the war in Ukraine have led us to a position which is quite typical in transformation. When the status quo is altered, there is always uncertainty, and that is an incentive for strategic positioning to be taken up by the stakeholders because there's going to be a paradigm shift. This phenomenon is one that we should start to get used to because we will see it over and over again over the next few years. I think volatility, high volatility, will be the key word over the next few years. We're seeing that Iberian market gas price, looking at the price that will be tomorrow, it will be close to 1920 euro the megawatt hour, and that has dropped again from the 200 that it was at the past. There was a very interesting article that was published in Foreign Affairs magazines. It was sort of new geopolitics of energy, and it talked about something that I think describes the situation in the article. It said that natural gas and fossil fuels, before they become completely irrelevant because they will be displaced, they will be even more relevant than before. We're seeing that now in Spain. We have committed to renewables. We have a very diversified electricity mix with a lot of renewable sources there. Nevertheless, despite the fact that gas will become even more and more marginal, there will still be an impact on all areas of the economy before things change. So uncertainty, high volatility, that's the backdrop, and that means that we need to work closely with the people who have less ability to deal with these uncertainty. Of course, the smallest operators, because we're talking about uncertainty, risk premium, we're talking about treasury issues, households, individuals, and also companies have to deal with those additional costs that may lead to the transition slowing down. It may be halted. In Spain, as the chairperson said, for months now we've been talking about the fact this is an extraordinary moment in time, so we need to take extraordinary measures. We have been pioneers. We have taken some extraordinary measures. You've heard the Iberian mechanisms. A lot of countries are turning to the Commission saying, yes, why don't you make this widespread and right across the board for all of us? We're the very first country, too, to say that there were certain technologies, because of this situation of the exponential growth of some of the marginal costs, that were actually making those windfall profits. And that it was only fair to take action to try and share out that windfall profit between consumers too. And when it was announced that gas needed to be saved, save gas for a safe winter package, we were one of the very first countries to take a step in that direction, the 1st of August, and the similar measures were taken after us by other countries. Those measures have continued with the passing by the Spanish Council of Ministers last year on approval of the contingency plan, with 73 measures grouped in 6 major themes. For instance, to try and better energy efficiencies, to improve the use of renewables, to increase strategic sovereignty and autonomy, and also to contribute to greater solidarity with our neighbouring countries. And today, and you've probably seen this in the news, the Council of Ministers has passed a royal decree that actually takes further those 20 measures there were already 13 or 14 that had been implemented. One of the new ones, I don't want to give you the full list, of course, it would take up too much time. But let me tell you, those protection measures for consumers will be going forward, all consumers, because remember, the pricing crisis is affecting more than just the vulnerable consumer groups. It's affecting middle classes, and there will be the massive price hike on people's electricity bills will affect people in their pocket. That is why the Royal Decree Law that has been passed today and that will be published officially tomorrow, there will be that social electricity bonus there. It's like a discount that's offered. There will be certain limits there for discounts that will be put up to 80% in the case of the severely vulnerable groups. In the case of that technical social discount, we've doubled the budget, another 225 million euros. So with the approval of that first package of measures, there was a lot of talk, you may remember, about saving energy and how important that is. And we've all learned, haven't we, how important it is to actually to lower the temperature of the heating in our homes. We can save 7% in electricity cost there. Remember, check whether your doors have been left open, look at your thermostat. So if anything positive can come out of this crisis, I think it is that we're all becoming more aware of how important energy is in our lives and how highly reliant we are on energy in our daily lives. And with just very small steps, such as putting solar panels on our roofs, we can move towards a more secure, safer and fairer transition. The slogan here is accelerating recovery from ESG. I think that's very, very pertinent phrase, isn't it? Because since the pandemic, we haven't yet been able to actually recover completely from the pandemic, because then we had the war. We have started to bring in those environmental, social and governance factors in everything we're doing. Spain was obviously clean about that when it designed its own recovery and resilience plan and advocated the investment that needed to be made with the new generation funds, decarbonisation of the economy, rollout of renewables, putting citizens, the people, right at the heart of the change. You will know too that all of these changes or these strategies have to also comply with do no significant harm. That criterion, which means that anything that is done, anything that is financed with these funds, cannot actually harm the environment at all. We must always bear in mind that mid-term or long-term vision, that horizon, at the same time as we're acting with regard to the current circumstances. 2021, our climate change and energy plan was also passed. It was the very first one here in Spain to rally and mobilize more resources. This was a big step forward to bringing in sustainability factors to public financing. So since that came into force, then those quantitative targets have to be included in all new laws. The law itself set out a clear timeline for the public and state sector's investment, and Redeia is now part of that, of course, formerly Red Eléctrica. Those financial instructions with any fossil fuel part in there have to change to extraction, refining or processing of any resources there. Then the obligation of with regard to taxation on fossil fuels and whether or not they are properly justified or not. So this concern for ESG isn't something that has just become important now for public institutions looking at their financing and what they're doing with their money. More investors than ever before are dealing with this. According to JP Morgan, 2021, more than $50 million were invested there under ESG headings, contributing to 25% of the assets that are being managed under these headings, really. I'm sure this will happen more in the future too, but we have to put more incentives in there. In fact, one of the IPCC's task force has concluded that clean energies, renewable energies, have to be increased at least sixfold in the years that are remaining up to 2050. Despite this trend, financial flows into clean energies are not enough. A lot of people feel that there isn't enough credibility there. There is some greenwashing here. And so that there still needs to be more funding for the climate, and companies are now being offered incentives so they can take measures with regard to governance. That is why we have to continue to drive this recovery. That climate change law that was passed in 2021 sets out the framework for investment that is sustainable by the private sector. There has to now be an annual report looking at the impact on climate-related risks because of exposure of the company's activity. As of 2023, credit institutions will have to publish specific targets for decarbonization of their loan book. Another reason why this title for this seminar is so pertinent is because we have to increase the rate of change. There are so many big challenges out there, climate change, and society wants us to deal with these challenges because if we do nothing, then things will just get worse and we will reach the worst case scenario. But I think we can be optimistic. We know what the levers are, what the drivers are, how we can work towards a fairer, more sustainable and stronger society and deal with these challenges. And then there is an issue there with regard to strategic sovereignty and security of supply. And the chairperson mentioned this before. The energy transition is absolutely essential to ensure we can have that full transition and stabilize prices. 80% of the global population live in net importing countries of energy. We have to take advantage of this moment in time and the fact that we are moving away from that reliance on fossil fuels. We need to be more independent. And Spain is a country where I believe we have these resources and the opportunities there to become an independent country in energy terms and then become a net exporter of clean energy and competitive. Subsequently, if there's anything that we have learned from these recent crises is that we can't make the same mistakes that we made in the past. We can't replace one form of reliance on another one. We can't perhaps switch from being reliant on fossil fuels to be reliant on any other mineral resources that are being extracted and mined in other countries, because that is not something that is viable either. That is why we have to create a favourable framework for the development of an industrial supply chain in Spain and come up with technological solutions for today and tomorrow. Recycling is one, the circular economy basically, or the consumption of critical items such as lithium, nickel and copper to make sure that if we can actually mine them in our own countries, we are fully respectful of the environment. We have our Secretary of State, who is in Seville today, participating in a conference on this, looking at the sustainability of critical raw materials or modern commodities there. Our government also wants that we shouldn't just switch one form of reliance on fossil fuels to a reliance on rare earths or minerals that come from other parts of the world where the environmental standards are much lower. As I said before, this is an opportunity too, as a transition, to make sure that people are at the heart of change. If we're going to alter that classical top-down model and make it bottom-up, I know it sounds a cliche. It's true, though. We have to make people, citizens, a part of this. Climate change has cost, but also has opportunities, and we have to explain to consumers and citizens that the net benefits are positive, but there will be costs in the short term, and they need to remember and be aware of the fact that they are also fundamental as agents for change in the decisions they take in their daily lives, and institutions have to remember that consumers need to be at the heart of this, and we need to look at how to deal with self-consumption. This energy transition is also an opportunity for change in many other areas that have been mentioned today. For this transformation to be much more innovative, inclusive, we have to take full advantage of all the talent we have in our society. Over the next few years, according to the International Agency for Renewable Energies, in a piece of research that was done with the ILO, there was a conclusion that this sector will have to grow drastically if we are to attain the targets that we've set in just 1 decade. We need to increase threefold the number of jobs in the sector. 12 million a year in 2020. It should go to 40 million jobs in 10 years' time. In that same study, we saw that there has to be a growing role played by women in this sector, and the percentage of women in the fossil fuels sector is 22%, not just at management level, but all over. And we need to bring in young talent, female talent, and we need to have, I know we have a lot of young women in the audience today, we need to do that so that future generations can take decarbonisation even further. And that is why it is necessary for women and young women need to study the right degree courses to be able to help in the future. The ministry has recently joined a task force that has been led by a Ministry of Education and Vocational Training with regard to women in education and STEM issues. We believe that it's important to actually give them incentives to learn in the technology, and I know that Redea has also joined this initiative. I will wrap up very soon. So we're living in changing times, uncertain times, where the challenges are ever greater and ever more complex, and we have very little time to be able to address them. Over the last few years, we have experienced a series of events that seemed highly unlikely, but they've had huge impact. COVID, the Filomena storm, we even had a volcano erupt in Spain, then the invasion of Ukraine. We're always looking out to see which one will be the next black swan event, what will happen. But we all need to be engaged here, companies, the government and citizens. So we need to ensure that we can work towards the targets. And if this is a common roadmap, it will be easy for us. And certainly from government, it's not enough just to do this on our own. We need a public-private partnership initiative there. These challenges can't just be dealt with by the public sector because our official government journal of laws can't do everything. We need to bring in the private sector and the third sector. I'd also like to acknowledge the importance of events like this one. It means that we can meet together, we can listen to each other, we can learn from each other, we can talk, we can hear those best practices, and we can calmly think about sustainability. And I know Redea is a benchmark company in all panels and about this. So once again, thank you for organising this annual event, and thank you for inviting the Ministry to join you. It's been an honour and a pleasure to be here, and I wish you every success over this 3-day event. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Manuel, por...
Thank you very much, Manuel, for that presentation. And there were some interesting points you made. For example, that this energy crisis we are experiencing because of this war has opened our eyes. A lot of us have started to think differently, particularly when it affects our own pockets. We tend to react. And this crisis has its bright side, I guess, which is that we're all going to be rowing possibly in the right direction as a result. And we're going to continue with conversation with experts, because I think it's time that those who are involved in research and so on contribute their points of view. And we have a presentation which is called An Opportunity for Global Development. And we know that we have 7.5 billion inhabitants in the planet. By 2050, according to the forecast, we will be close to 100 billion. And clearly there has to be a different development than the one we've had these last decades in order for everything to be sustainable. so that the economy and nature can coexist, which are now very much in conflict. Whenever we talk about nature and the economy, it sounds like we're talking about two things that cannot coincide. But clearly now, more than ever, we require transformation towards sustainability, as Beatriz and also Manuel said. This is a clear need, but it's also a historical opportunity for humans to do something we had never done before, which is an unprecedented transformation in record time. And to deal with global challenges like climate change and the loss of biodiversity, we need to enhance our responses. We need to set ambitious goals, but we must also be very realistic with what we're going to do. And we sometimes have a lot of theories, but then we don't really apply them in practice. We come up with a lot of great solutions in theory, but then they're never actually implemented. And I think that's where we are right now, at this critical point of really getting things moving and truly acting. And we need to talk about protecting biodiversity, but also regenerating the economic fabric in order to have a habitable planet, which is what we all want, a pleasant one, but also to have prosperity, because we all want to prosper in what we do, not just the wealthier countries, but every country in the world. We know the impacts of global change are very uneven. Some countries are affected very adversely, and they unfortunately do not have the resources to fight this challenge. And climate change and biodiversity loss are two sides of the same coin, and that's part of the title of this roundtable today. And the health of ecosystems is crucial in order to mitigate or even prevent the worst impacts of climate change. And to start this discussion, I'm going to call on three people. Antonella Battaglini, who's Director General of Renewables Grid Initiative, RGI. Also David Howell, who is responsible for climate and energy, environmental governance area at Sea of BirdLife. I think that most of you will be familiar with these two organizations, very committed to the fight against climate change in Europe, and also with the integration of renewable energy in the electricity system. And we also have had Atienza, a journalist from El Español, who specializes in international affairs and geopolitics, but obviously also on environmental topics.
So our conversation is going to be in English, I believe. And we have a very important topic to discuss and debate. Nature and the opportunity to integrate nature with economy in a global context of evolution. So I think we're going to listen to very important things you have to say, and it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, thank you, y buenas tardes. This forum organized by Redeia, in which, as Mario said, we are going to talk about if there is a second chance for global development. I am Jara Atienza, a reporter from El Español. Before starting, I would like to introduce our two panelists, Antonella Battaglini and David Howell. And Antonella is the CEO of Renewable Grid Initiative, which she founded in 2009. And this is a unique collaboration of NGOs and TCOs, transmission system operator from across Europe. And its main objective is to promote a fair, transparent, and sustainable grid development to enable the growth of renewable energy and to achieve full decarbonization in line with the Paris Agreement. In addition to this, Antonella is an expert member of the Global Future Council on Clean Electrification of the World Economic Forum, as well as an expert of European Commission Interconnection Target Group. For many years, she also has held the position of senior scientist at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Change. And our second speaker is David Howell, who is responsible for climate and energy in the environmental governance area of Sea of BirdLife, the Spanish Ornithological Society. This is a leading environmental NGO that was founded in 1954, and its goal is the conservation of biodiversity, with birds as its flagship, and with the involvement and participation of the whole society. David has also an extensive experience in the management and conservation of protected areas of Natura 2000 network, as well as in the coordination of environmental policies. So okay, now it's time. Antonella, David, welcome, and thank you for being here. So now I'm going to ask you a few questions, but I would love to have a nice and free talk, so please do not hesitate to interrupt me or to talk to each other or make questions even if you want, not to me, please. So okay, I would like to start with the present, right? Because we are facing an energy crisis, and we are seeing like governments are given different responses, but in general, they are all asking people to make sacrifices, to reduce their energy consumption. So I would like to ask you, how can we explain people that we need to make these sacrifices in order not just to reduce our dependence on Russian fossil fuels, but to reduce the use of energy in general, and fossil fuel energy? So Antonella?
I think I start. First of all, thank you very much for this invitation, and congratulations for this day. Sustainability has to become part of our DNA, because without sustainability, there is no longer a business case. It is a business risk not to have very sustainable practices. So really, congratulations for this. Sacrifices. Yeah, this is a good word. I would like to start by saying that the age of plenty is over. We have been grown up with the ideas that we can afford everything. Well, it's no longer the case. I would argue that we have entered the age of scarcity. And scarcity not only requires sacrifices, it requires a completely new mindset, which has to be rooted around doing more with less, optimization not only of the energy resources, but all the resources we have. You have seen that we have shortages of gas, but we have shortages in the supply chains, we have even shortages of people, we have shortages of funds, political will, nature, space, you name it. There is a shortage of everything. So actually, I am concerned that policymakers around Europe are not asking citizens to make sacrifices. They are not binding the citizens to this massive and probably painful coming winter. They are not really telling the truth about what is the role of each of us to contribute into delivering a future which is not just for us, but it is for our kids. It's for the next generation. And so I'm afraid that I do not agree with your question. We are not asked to do sacrifice, but we should. And actually, I also would like to invite Redea and all the other grid operator and energy company to bring out the message that we are all in the same boat. Essentially, the grid operators across Europe will face very difficult, hard moments because they are responsible for keeping the lights on. If something goes wrong, they are going to be blamed. And this entitles you to actually be much more outspoken. This is part of the leadership that we need today, to be outspoken and to help people to navigate uncertainties and probably advise policymakers to be a bit more forward-looking. Thank you.
Can I follow that up? Firstly, giving my thanks to Redea, and especially within Redea, to Eléctrica for this invitation, for this debate, for this opportunity. And congratulations to you for your leadership in your strategic plan out to 2026, where Eléctrica is saying to the country and to the world, Spain will have an electricity network that is fit for 67% renewables by 2026. That's exactly the type of signal that we need grid authorities to send to civil society, to businesses, to markets, to investors. And also, secondly, another key signal for us as a nature conservation organization, you have also set out how you will try to do that, minimizing difficulties with local communities and with biodiversity, and maximizing the opportunities for benefits. That's what we need. That's the kind of signal that we need, not just from grid authorities. We need that from governments at every level. And we haven't been getting those signals from governments at every level. That's a key question, and I thank Red Eléctrica for your leadership in that field. And to come to the question, sacrifice with what's happening at the moment, I was saying over lunch, I remember very clearly the terrible crisis that my country, the UK, went through in the mid-1970s. I remember the power cuts, I remember the oil crisis, I remember playing cards with my brothers with a paraffin lamp lit because we couldn't turn the lights on. Businesses were required to work only 3 days a week because there wasn't enough electricity.
I remember learning to skate in the streets, actually. It was not just bad, it was good.
So did we have to make a sacrifice at that time? Yes, we did. The country went through a terrible sacrifice. The country had to go to the IMF for an enormous loan to rescue the country's economy. And I remember very clearly, every light switch you saw anywhere in any public space had a little sticker by the light switch which said, "Save it. Ahorra." Switch it off. I don't see that now. I don't see that anywhere. I see notices on walls, but not that simple intelligence of a sticker right by where your finger lands on the light switch to turn that light switch off. And the other thing I think we could maybe learn from, I hesitate to say this, but we could probably learn from the language of climate diplomacy, which talks about nationally determined contributions, not nationally determined sacrifices. Contributions. So what contribution can everybody make? Everybody as an individual, as a family, as a community of neighbors, as a neighborhood, as a city, as a region, as a country, as a business, as an institution. What can we contribute to get us through this crisis, as Antonella has rightly said, this winter, and you were saying as well, not just maybe this winter. The energy transition and the ecological transition will be incredibly difficult, and there will be many, many crises to come, and we should be prepared for them. Why? Why will there be many to come? Because we've taken so long to recognize what's been coming towards us with the speed of an express train. And the very unpleasant reminder we've had is the war in Ukraine. So I say contribution is a good word to think of, as well as sacrifice. Contribution.
Can I add something else? I think it would be really, in a way, stupid to think that we only have challenges. We also have plenty of opportunities. The crisis in the 70s brought a new wave of efficiency. We learned really to be much more efficient. I think that this crisis will bring a new wave of saving in a circular mentality, because, well, we have no way out. But the opportunities are plenty, also from a societal point of view, because we need to rediscover what is democracy today. How do we deal with people, with opposition? Why are people opposing? Especially electricity grids have been facing huge public opposition. Can we still afford this? Are we going to really meet every single nitty-gritty request from everyone that pops up? No, we don't have the time for that. But at the same time, we need to understand what are the needs that people really need to have met. And can we design packages that allow us to move us much, much faster in deploying the energy infrastructure that we need while taking people along. And so it is good to understand the challenges, but it is also essential to see and search for new opportunities.
So, but again, you were talking about the infrastructure, but how can you assure public support to this energy infrastructure, to large energy infrastructure, if we don't have enough time to do that?
Well, this is a complicated question, and I can give you a quick answer. Energy infrastructure serves a purpose. You build something because you want to achieve certain targets. And we are talking about full decarbonization and a healthy environment. By the way, if we do not also address the biodiversity crisis, we will not be able to decarbonize. A lot of people don't grasp this yet, but the two strictly belong together. So we need to be able to describe what is this future that we are trying to achieve, and walk the path together. I'm not building a power line. I'm building, the power line is a puzzle of this future. And therefore, the key to public engagement, public support, is a shared future. If you say A and you say B, and I'm in the middle, actually I don't know who is right, who is wrong. Who am I going to listen to? But if you bring together key actors that essentially construct the same narratives for this future, then you can also get the public engaging with you and supporting your objectives.
And I think there's a very clear lesson from us, from the scientists of the two global panels. Everybody knows, of course, about the IPCC, but I would encourage you all to get to know IPBES, which is the sister panel to the IPCC. It has really exactly the same function, but advising on the biodiversity crisis, not the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis. And they met together at the end of 2020 in a joint workshop and published their report last spring. And they were very clear, picking up on what you were so rightly saying, Antonella, that unless we tackle the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis together, thinking about one when we're tackling the other, then we risk losing amazing social benefits. If we just tackle one without thinking about the other, we risk getting ourselves into a whole host of difficult social problems. But if, for example, installing new energy infrastructure, new renewable installations, new lines, new substations, we're at the same time thinking about the need to do that in a way which is as compatible as possible with biodiversity objectives. To do that well, you are thinking immediately about where to put it, how to do it, how to have as light a footprint as possible, and the best way to do that is talk to people in the area as well as talk to experts. So that combination, I think, of talking to citizens and talking to experts is a key element, which we've also seen in the Citizens Climate Panel, by the way, in Spain, which produced its report earlier this year. Very interesting challenge for the political world and the business world in their over 170 recommendations. But what an interesting example of what happens when you combine the common sense of 100 people chosen at random from around the country with independent expert opinion. And I think there is a key lesson for many in government and many in business.
David, excuse me, but you have mentioned the collaboration between different parts, and I would like to ask you, which is the role of a TCO in enable this energy? TSO.
Well, the TSOs have a very important role, and I would say they've been hiding far too long. They've been hiding against the interpretation of their mandate. I've been working with TSOs now for 14 years, and I'm not an engineer, so some of you can guess how hard the beginning was. But anyway, TSOs are given the mandate to connect generation site. And many TSOs for many, many years have interpreted their mandate as the need to be neutral. But actually, and by the way, Red Eléctrica, and now Redea for sure, but Red Eléctrica for sure is a member of RGI. I have been trying to educate, if you allow me this word, the TSOs, that their mandate, it was not about neutrality, but about being non-discriminatory. TSOs can have opinions, and today they need to have opinions. If you operate the grid and you are responsible for system security, you better have an opinion. So the role of the TSOs is fundamental, and it has to become much more of a public knowledge. People have to be aware. Without the grids, there is not a renewable future. RGI was set up in 2009 because on a panel, a bit bigger than this, the TSOs were saying, oh, these are renewable targets, we need to build grids, but no one wants them, crying. And the NGOs on the same panel were saying, 100% renewable, we don't want grids. I said, hey, these two things don't fit together. If you want renewables, you need to want grids. And you as a TSO, so an engineer, an electric engineer in many cases, you cannot come to me or to the NGOs or to the citizens saying, this is the project, you take it because I tell you that we need it. When I started RGI, a lot of people were saying, oh, you can't understand, this is too difficult. So I spent probably the first 2-3 years telling the engineers, well, if I don't understand, it's not my fault, it's your fault, because you are not explaining that well enough. And this is this has been an incredible learning, because in this decade or so, the TSOs have really improved the way they operate. They become much more visible, and this event today is a proof of that. And they have started to express opinions. Don't forget that the TSOs themselves were saying, oh, we cannot have more than X% renewables, wind and solar, in the system because we cannot maintain stability. Today, a lot of TSOs are showing that we can have easily even 100% renewables because you are developing the solutions. And what I want to stress is that what we need to tell people is that we don't need to have all the solutions for the end game. We need to know what we do tomorrow morning. We need to learn by doing one step after the other and give the confidence to policymakers and to citizens that actually we can do this. We are on the business of doing this, and that we are committed to deliver. And I'm seeing more and more leadership coming out of the TSO. So be vocal, because this energy transition cannot be realized without you.
David, as a member
And thinking of the vital job that TSOs have in a country's society and its economy and its stability and its relationship with its neighbours. You're responsible for planning and maintaining the electricity network, but not responsible for planning and maintaining the energy supply, the generators. Within Spain, we know we have a difficulty a great challenge of the way that the Spanish state is structured, with 17 individual autonomous communities who also have responsibilities in this field for deciding where, up to a certain level, energy infrastructure can be promoted and installed. And I think there we need to have a much clearer signal from national operators, whether we're talking about government, whether we're talking about Red Eléctrica, whether we're talking about the regulator. The regional governments need to do their job much better.
I want to add one thing. Because the regional governments are indeed very important, but also Europe is very important. In a moment of crisis, there is a tendency to go back, like a turtle inside. But if you are inside, you can't move. A turtle needs to stick the head out to be able to walk. And we know that the energy system is large, and the larger it is, the more resilient it is, the more economical it is. The TSOs have been working in the European context very closely together. It is important that this continues, but it is also important that there is advice towards government for more European energy policies, for more Europe, because alone it will be much more difficult to reach full decarbonization.
So, okay, we are almost out of time, and I would like to ask you, what is the main message that you would like the audience to take away in 30 seconds?
You can do it, tell the people, prove that there are solutions, and scale them for every single project you do.
We're in a moment where we need to redefine progress and redefine prosperity, and redefine the role of business in society. We've got up to a certain level with competition and with efficiency, but efficiency in generating wealth and in concentrating wealth in fewer and fewer hands. We need to now have efficiency in creating benefits for nature and creating speedy decarbonization. That's some of the ways we need to start to measure efficiency now, because that way we will we'll be efficient in generating social benefits and not generating social problems, which is what up to now competition efficiency, profit efficiency has generated. So let's move forward in a much more positive way of generating much wider benefits.
Okay, so Antonella, David, thank you very much for addressing this interesting and complex topic. It's really been a pleasure listening to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you very much, David, Jara. Very interesting remarks and very interesting points. Vamos a cambiar de aires y vamos a cambiar de rumbo.
We're going to change tack now, change direction. What we're going to do is invite some young people up to the stage. Those young people who will, one way or another, inherit what we and you and all of us have been doing over the last few decades with regard to biodiversity and climate change. So we're going to be providing you with a different viewpoint on things, and to do that we have 4 young people who will be joining us, and they represent so many other young people behind them. And they belong to the junior section of WAS, Women, Action and Sustainability, for young girls. This is a highly active association of professional women working in sustainability to try and raise the profile of this issue to the highest decision-making level in companies. The association has also brought in young people who are also concerned about conserving our planet and doing what they can to stop climate change. I was at COP26 in Glasgow, and I got a chance to talk to a lot of young people who were attending, and I came back absolutely amazed and astonished by their action, the conversation I had with them, and how clear they were about what had to be done. I think they see things even more clearly than we do. We've been working in this area for years now. So as I said, we have 4 young girls with us today, and I'll introduce them one by one in a moment. The youngest, Antia. You're just 11, aren't you? 12. She's just turned 12, she says. Yes, I see. I should have updated my script there. Claudia is also the second youngest. Let's start off with Antia, and then I'll introduce you to the other participants, Sofia and Claudia. Antia, then. Right now you're studying at middle school, aren't you? Lower middle school. So you're still at school. You haven't even got to university age yet, and you're participating in sustainability issues at the Maris Brothers College in Lugo. That's where you study. I got that right, didn't I? And you are taking small steps, undertaking small actions. We haven't a lot of time, but give us some insight into what you're doing. Tell us about your concerns and where have those concerns taken you so far? What have you attained in this personal struggle, this personal battle in your school? Well, my school has always been very much aware of what had to be done with the environment. Last year they started up a system of environmental delegates or representing the class, and I was one that was elected then. And we together thought that maybe we could have more recycling bins in our school. So we asked our class tutors to give us those recycling facilities, and we got them. We also organized a meeting with Monica Chow, who is the chair of WAS, Women Action Sustainability, to be able to, so she could talk to the people at school and convince them that this is such an important issue. I don't think they realize just how dangerous this might end up being, because if we don't solve this now, there won't be many more future generations on the planet. I'm just 12 at the moment. I haven't even got up to secondary school. I can't do anything really big. I've just been taking small steps, undertaking small-scale actions, but they are still important because anything that you can do, any little bit helps, doesn't it? More or less it helps. Even if it's just making a friend or someone in your family aware of the problems, then you can do just as much as people who've been in this business for years. So you're saying every little bit helps. Yes, that saying actually works here. It might just be a bin that you've put in place, but you're out there motivating your classmates about this. That's great. Well, so you understand what this means and how these are very simple steps, and it helps people at school to learn what's happening. Well, let me turn to Claudia. She's 18. She's studying a business course, a university course here in Madrid, And for years, since she was little, she's been very much aware of what has to be done to help things on the planet. She's also been in a scout group, and I think that helps you also to have a different viewpoint on things. Claudia, can you tell us about your experience and how important your struggle is? First of all, thank you to Redea and thank you to Fatima Rojas and to WAS for allowing me to join you and speak today. I don't have a project like Sophia and the other colleague has, Olivia, but I just want to say how important small actions can be. They can have a big impact. Since I was very little, as Mario has already said, I used to go to my scout group and they explained to me that we have to leave things even in a better state than we found them in. So what we used to do when we used to go camping, we used to make sure that we picked up all of the rubbish that we found, all the waste, and we used the waste to even build the latrines, and we spent the whole fortnight doing things like that. And apart from that, since I was very little, my father, he used to have a system with us. So he made this up, which was an action a day. So just say we were walking to the beach or coming back from the beach, we had to find something and pick up some rubbish. I know it's just a little thing that you're doing, but it makes a difference. And I've been thinking about what I could do when you gave me this invitation, and I thought about perhaps setting up an Instagram account, and people could upload photos and videos about helping the environment, not just for us as young people, but for future generations. All of us have to help out. We all have to do something. Pull our weight and realize that we have to have a future by helping our environment. That is important measures today, which is the day for protection of nature, isn't it? Well, that's great. I think in that TikTok or Instagram, do you dance? If you did, I'm sure you'll get lots of followers. I'm not on TikTok myself, but I think a social media initiative would be great, Sophia. Thank you. We also have with us a girl with another project, which I think is very creative, because what we've seen over time is that transformation. Sophia, Claudia, I'm getting mixed up with names. I actually almost called the chairperson of Redea Christine instead of Beatriz, so I'm getting people's names mixed up. Sophia, 24, you're older than the others. I think you have a pure circular economy project, which is the way forward in this world, because you love designing earrings. You've got some on now, and you like to reuse the raw materials. Tell us about your project. How did you start off in this world of the circular economy? Well, thank you very much for giving me the chance to speak, Mario. Thank you to Redea for inviting me to join you today. Thank you to WAS, the WAS Association. I'm so excited about being here. So my name is Sofia Mestre. I'm 24. I'm a WAS junior and I'm a lawyer. I have lots of artistic hobbies. And I'm going to tell you in particular about one of them because it makes sense in this framework that I design jewelry and earrings. And I have my own brand, and I have my own brand, Pendientes del Nombre. And we have the vice president of said that I should try to actually use old tires. I created a task force, like a multidisciplinary task force, and we started to explore using different materials and coming up with different solutions to build or to put together and design some sort of earrings or other forms of jewelry that made from old tires that were environmentally friendly. We also want to show people how we could reverse the process of pollution and contamination in natural spaces. So we would end up with green spaces where there were polluted spaces. We use rubber as our resource, and we make them into earrings like the ones I'm wearing. I think personally that they're very pretty. So that's my project for you. Well, thank you. And you can tell us about where they're on sale. Let's see if we can sell some sustainable products too. Well, thank you very much. And lastly, let me turn to Olivia Mandel. I hope I pronounced your name right. She's a young environmental activist who is working for the rights of animals and to free the ocean of waste. She's also an ambassador for the European Commission's Climate Pact. You're an activist then, and you've been in this for a long time, haven't you? You're very much engaged with certain projects, which are big ones. I mean, how did you get to that point, and what would you say to other people who might be interested in getting into this world? What's your experience? Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for giving me this chance to be here. And congratulations to you three for everything you do. I'm 15. I'm from Barcelona. And I am. What I'm doing is trying to ensure we can have plastic-free oceans. This all goes back to 2019 when I saw an environmental impact exhibition, and I was struck by this, and I wanted to create some way of actually collecting up the plastics from the ocean. Look at this picture. I didn't look at it as something that should be a big engineering concept, or something straightforward, something we could make from what we have at home. So I'm also defined worked for dolphins, and I started back in 2020. I went to the town hall of Barcelona for the zoo to ask them to send or move the dolphins that were there to a marine sanctuary because they were in. Then they were sent to a zoo in Athens. That was disappointing for me. I was frustrated, and so I've launched my new campaign. There it is. It's not a country for dolphins. It's hashtag there. Please sign it. So I've also signed up on change.org, and I've asked the government to actually gradually close down these zoos. 137,000 people have already signed it, and we have scientific support from big organizations. This project led me to making a name for myself internationally, and I've started to work with the World Wide Foundation, National Geographic, etc., etc. And as you said, I'm also the ambassador for the EU's Climate Pact. I'm going to say a few things to you now, and I love these things, and it's true. My generation, this is one of them, my generation is the generation with the need to make change, but we may also be the very last generation with the possibility of undertaking real change before it's too late. Think about that. And my life's mission is to raise awarenesses about the deplorable state of our planet and about our relationship with nature, which is completely broken. But there is still hope. There is still time for us to change that relationship to a relationship of mutual understanding and respect, and not make it human exploitation only. Nature is amazing. Nature doesn't need us, but we do need nature. It is now time to protect it. Let's act now. Thank you. Well, thank you very much to our four guests. You can understand perhaps why I made a mistake with their names, because they all sound the same at the end. Olivia, Sofia, Claudia, they all sound the same at the end, don't they? Ia. But thank you for those inspiring stories and your actions. Each action that you take, all four of you, are valuable. They all add up, don't they? We've been talking about governments and businesses here, but at the end of the day, it's the people, citizens, that have the last word about what we should be doing. And in the future, I'm sure that they will be people who make a difference. And I hope you manage to bring more people into your battle behind you. Thank you to the four of you.
Continuamos con la jornada. Muchísimas gracias a las 4 por...
Hey, thank you, all four of you, for sharing this projects, and I wish you the greatest possible success. We're going to start with the panel sessions. We have two fascinating panel sessions to close today's session. And the first of them about climate change and biodiversity, two sides of the same coin. We're going to have experts with a more scientific perspective, even on the matter. We're also going to talk about the implications of climate change and the impact on the environment, and of course biodiversity, because it's not just about climate change but about the loss of biodiversity and how they're interrelated. We know biodiversity is crucial, not just because we like to see all the species out there just as they are, but also because biodiversity itself is a way to mitigate the impact of climate change. Without biodiversity, the impacts of global climate change will be even worse in many places. And so in this panel session, which is going to be moderated by Cristina Monge, who's a political scientist, a social scientist, and an expert in the climate emergency and the energy transition, we're going to have various guests. I'm going to have Cristina come up here. And together with Cristina, we're going to have Ricardo García Herrera, whom unfortunately was unable to attend in person, so he'll be participating remotely. Also Miguel Delibes de Castro and María Begoña García. So three participants in this panel who are going to give us a more scientific perspective of the problem. Welcome, all three of you. Hello, Cristina.
Bueno, estaba pensando en...
No está la presidenta de Ardella, ¿verdad? Menudo lío.
Bueno, todo vuestro. Ya sabes, en tus manos moderar el tiempo porque vamos un poquito...
All right, Cristina, we're running a little late, so let's get started straight away. Can you hear me? Yes, you can. Okay, thank you very much, Mario, for the introduction. Thank you, Chairwoman Beatriz, and congratulations for this forum. I think that I don't really need to say very much after everything we've heard here already. There's nothing more urgent right now than dealing with the climate emergency we are living in the difficult context we have today because of the war in Ukraine. But not only that, there's also many other challenges. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity and very timely that you're hosting this seminar with these topics. Let me start where these young girls finished. By the way, all four were women. I'm just going to say that. But let me start where they were, where they finished, because as Olivia said quite rightly, and explained very simply something that is sometimes hard to explain. I find it really difficult to explain it in my classroom, but she explained it really well. She said, nature doesn't need us, but we need nature. And to understand that, to grasp that, which might seem really obvious, the way Olivia put it, is actually very difficult. And that's probably because of communication issues, because we tend to create communication myths in an attempt to explain things better, but actually making it worse. When we talk about the environmental transition, about climate change, we have some of these myths. One of them, for example, is to say that we have to work for sustainability in order to guarantee the future of the planet. But that's not true. It's not the planet that has the problem with climate change. The problem with climate change, the real challenge, is for living organisms on the planet, but not for the planet itself. The planet, unless we blow it up, which is something I don't even want to mention given the current context, has a tremendous ability to generate resiliency. Of course, that living organisms on the planet are a lot more vulnerable, particularly human beings. And it's not just about the future. We've heard these young women who are, between, 12 and 24 years of age, and they're here already, but the effects of climate change are here already too. And we just have to think of this last summer, or even today in Madrid, October 18th, and it's almost 30 degrees out there. And Bilbao today, 31 degrees. So we're all aware of the fact that climate change is not a problem for the future or for the planet. It's a problem for today and for the beings that live on this planet. And that's something that we need to include in all of our discussions. And we have these wonderful three speakers in this panel. And Ricardo, even though you're not here in person, it's great to have you. Ricardo Garcia is the director of the Red Eléctrica group, and he's at home right now because he has COVID. He's fine, as we can see, but he felt it safer to speak from home. And we're also with Miguel Delibes de Castro. It's a real pleasure, Miguel, to share a panel with you. Absolute pleasure. And finally, a colleague from the University of Zaragoza and from the Pyrenees Institute of Ecology, Begoña Garcia. Good afternoon, all. And in this panel session, we've been asked to talk about these two elements which are often confused in public discussion, and that is climate change and biodiversity. And climate change is actually a symptom. Climate change is the planet having a fever, but why does the planet have a fever? What's the cause? And then we have everything to do with biodiversity. And in the public, it sounds as if it's all the same thing. But actually, if we went out there and did a survey asking people to explain what climate change is and what the problems with biodiversity are, was people probably would confuse the two. We see increasing concern over the climate change crisis, but very few people connect climate change and threats on biodiversity. And yet we know that half the world's GDP is currently under threat because of climate change, but also because of the loss of biodiversity. And these are two things that we need to understand very clearly. And Ricardo, since you're not here in person, I'm going to start with you. What's the connection between these two things, between climate change and biodiversity? And how can we explain that these are two different things, but that they're absolutely interconnected? Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, and I apologize for not being there in person. Luckily, I'm able to follow it online. And I think from the point of view of a climate scientist, which is my profession, a good way of looking at it is to think that climate change is a process which began about 150 years ago, where without realizing it, we started to heat up the atmosphere and the whole climate system. And if we succeed, that is, if we meet the Paris targets in about 30 years from now, it will no longer be heating up further. If we succeed also, the effects will remain within that 2-degree increase. But of course, now I have to realize that we're already at about 1.2 degree above the pre-industrial period, which means that if we succeed, we're still going to have a very difficult climate setting. Because what does that temperature increase mean? Well, apart from all the things we've already heard, above all, for example, more frequent extreme climate events. I was reading the other day when I was preparing this talk that in the US in the 80s, the frequency of extreme weather events with multi-million-dollar impacts was 1 every 82 days. And now it's 1 every 18 days, which means that we are really stressing the system. And of course, the human species is quite good at adapting because, for example, when temperatures rise, with a negative feedback cycle, what do? We use more energy for air conditioning. And we can do that relatively quickly. For example, in about 25 years, electricity demand peaks in Spain will no longer be in the winter and will probably mostly happen in the summer. And how do we protect ourselves against other extreme events? By building infrastructures. Countries that have resources to extend those infrastructures are moving in that direction. But that applies to the human species. The other species on the planet obviously cannot react in the same way, and the fact that temperatures are going up, that we're changing precipitation patterns and so on, is affecting biodiversity very significantly. Well, thank you for being so clear and so concrete in the connections between those two. And I know that you, for years and decades, have been thinking and writing about these topics, and you've probably followed a very different path. You've been looking more at biodiversity and nature conservation topics, and that's how you started to work in the area of climate change. So how would you describe it? Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for listening to us. I think that it is such a close interconnection that you really cannot separate the two. I have often stated that it's not just global warming, which is really the clearest way to talk about climate change. There's uncontrolled warming and biodiversity are two sides of the same coin, but actually under the same environmental perspective, we have the fertilization of the planet, the pollution, air pollution, which makes us sick, the problem with the ozone layer, although that's actually been resolved. But all of these are aspects of the same problem. And actually right now, of course, it's a pressing concern because it's very obvious, global warming. But if we look at solving only that, we're not going to really fix the problem. We're not going to achieve the sustainability we need. As Ricardo put it, adaptation is harder for plants and wild animals than for us, since we can go on holidays somewhere cooler, or in Seville, where I live, we slept in the upper floors in the winter and down in the basement in the summer where it was cooler. But it's not just that, it's that by destroying biodiversity, we're actually driving climate change, and we're polluting the soil by the excessive use of fertilizers, and that also drives climate change. And the biosphere and biodiversity is the most functional living piece of this system. Wonderful machinery, as some of the girls who spoke before said, and this wonderful machinery gives us resources and treats our waste, ours and those of other living creatures. And what we have done by overexploiting those resources, or what we are doing, and by exceeding the biosphere's ability to process our waste, is to destroy it. We're destroying that balanced metabolism that living beings on this planet had. And so we now have to correct and solve all those problems all at once. And that's why, as the chairwoman said at the beginning, the word transform is the really crucial one. We need to transform the way we do things, but also the way we live, and radically transform our lifestyles, whilst understanding the complexity of all this. Well, transformation means radical change. And a question that's often asked, which I think is a trick question, is to say, do we have to give up on part of our current well-being? Well, that's a trick question, because the problem is that in order to be well, we don't really need that many things. If well-being is flying to the Dominican Republic a couple of times a year, then yes, we do have to give up on that level of well-being, because that's not sustainable. But if well-being is eat tastier fruit and be more comfortable and spend more time talking to friends, then we're not giving up on our well-being. We're going to have to improve our well-being, but in a different way. Which means we have to rethink a lot of things, including how we define well-being and progress. And following along that line, something I've thought about a lot recently, I do think we need to question that concept of sacrifice in the environmental transition. But we don't have to go in that direction right now, because we might get lost. But I wanted to ask Begoña first. We know that mountain ecosystems are some of the most vulnerable to climate change. We've all seen forecasts of how glaciers like Aneto or Perdidos are shrinking alarmingly, and actually that's one of the reasons why there are more mountaineering accidents every summer in the Pyrenees in Aragon. But Begoña, from your experience in the Pyrenees Institute of Ecology, you're seeing this impacts in real time, climate change and its impacts and the loss of biodiversity and how it affects ecosystem. The fact that mountains are more vulnerable ecosystems, how does that affect, for example, water availability, something crucial when we know that our reservoirs are now well below the average of the last years?
Yes, it's absolutely tremendous. As you said, the mountains are out there, and they are the watchtowers for us. They're so complex. They're the fifth of all of the biodiversified systems. And you just look at the mountains, and you'll find out what's happening around you. Our institute is multidisciplinary. It's also part of a consortium. And we've seen quite clearly that the temperature has risen by 1.6 degrees centigrade since the 1960s in the Pyrenees, and that glaciers are thawing out. In 30 years' time, they will be the fifth of what they were. They're not big, and they don't affect tremendously our water reserves, but we're seeing there is less rainfall. Temperatures are going up, and so yes, the rainfall rates are going to change. Droughts are more frequent, they're lasting longer, plus the fact that we are seeing that people are leaving the rural areas of the mountains, and water is actually being retained in the mountains and actually getting down to the streams that come down the mountains. The ecosystems are changing. A lot of us who are living in cities and towns, the majority of us, we look out to the mountains and we say, oh, that's where we'd like to go in the summer. We'd like to go and do some sport there and look at the pretty landscape. But we actually rely so much on mountains that the water is there, it's being retained and it's released there. And if it doesn't come down to us in the towns and cities below, we'd have to stop just looking at mountains as areas that we are exploiting, and we have to actually make the most of them, because we won't be able to produce what we need in cities. We produce it in mountains. It's so important to understand that. One of the problems that we are seeing now as we move towards the energy transition, and we'll get to that point in a minute, is about relationships between territories, isn't it? Quite often, we in towns and cities are looking outwards, don't we? I live in a city as well, and we look at the mountains, we see it's a great place to go and have a fun weekend, but we're not really aware of how much we in towns and cities actually rely on the territory around us. We rely on water. We need to have drinking water. We have to clean water, safe water, and we need that to produce foodstuffs as well. When we were locked down and we all ended up staying at home during the COVID, there was a paper that had been written before, and it picked up again the same idea, how long that we could actually withstand being locked down in a city without bringing something from the outside. And Madrid was one of the examples in that piece of research. I mean, how long can Madrid actually continue to survive without any forms of transport coming in or out of the city, so that we can actually be self-sufficient in food? Do you know how long? Any guesses? Looking at the Excel sheet, it said 7 days, but that's not true, because you know that if there's a real shortage on our hands, we all go straight to the supermarket and do some hoarding, don't we? So that shows you just how much we depend on the land around us, and it's hard for us to understand that. Another thing that is showing us how we have that tricky relationship is something I want to ask you about in a moment. We're working at this diagnosis on climate change and how it matters for biodiversity, and I think we also have to focus on ways out. I don't like to use the word solutions. Let's say options, technological options to move forward. And one way to manage this climate change crisis and to try and halt the loss of biodiversity is to use more renewable energies. And that is also generating tension around us in territories on the land, because it could also be a problem with biodiversity conservation regard. You've studied a lot about this, haven't you? So how can we make this compatible? On one hand, you've got renewable energy-based energy model, which has to be environmentally friendly, which helps us towards transition, but at the same time, you have to ensure that we can deal with the challenges that the territories have, the regions and the local areas. Well, if you think about transition with one of the words that was used by the chairperson of Rodea in her opening remarks, then it is a transition that has to be something that is fair, just. We have to be sure that we know where we're going, and we need to be sure of what we're doing being legitimate in society. If we don't have that social legitimacy, if you're putting out energy infrastructure and it's not fair, then things won't work out. We'd find that we would be bringing out more inequality. You were talking about this. So some people out there in a region or local area might say that my landscape is my resource and it is being changed, if I could use that word, by new infrastructure that's being built there. And they don't see what the benefit for them will be. Well, those people or that person will feel that the energy transition is not fair, is not being fair or just with them. So there's a lot of social lobbying that has to be done to get that agreement between the different stakeholders in the chains. And as we heard in the previous panel, there's this contradiction that we have on our hands. We do want to have clean energy, don't we? And that means you have to roll out different facilities, infrastructure. But if you don't get the social backing behind that, if people will feel that they are the losers in the energy transition, things won't ever be really successful. And it's not just about a moral argument, it's about efficiency as an argument, because people will actually be reluctant to get that quick rollout, which has to be quick. So you're saying people will be reluctant to have that fast rollout that we need. And one argument that we've heard is landscape, countryside. How can we actually reconcile that rollout with facilities with the value of landscapes? I think it's so difficult. I don't have the answer to this problem. I think we have to work more together. Just as Ricardo was saying, residents of rural areas and advocates of rural areas have those who see the infrastructure being built there have to work together with people who are going to build them, with scientists, academia. I think we need to do much more to promote infrastructures being built on industrial estates, in cities and towns, in areas basically that have already been transformed. This is done, but I live in a flat in Seville, and for the last 3 years we have been arguing about whether or not we should put those solar panels on the roof of our building, because not all of the residents are happy to pay for those panels. I don't think it should be that hard. Why not provide subsidies for things like that? There are only 32 of us residents in the building, and I think 15 are for and 17 are against, and we don't seem to get anywhere with those PV panels. But if you put them in an area where you have some endangered species there, then I could understand why there should be people arguing. So I think we need to do some rethinking. Perhaps put together a task force, a working group, because somehow we have to make these wind facilities and the PV panels compatible with diversity and biodiversity in the landscape. We do have panel sessions. We meet in places like this, don't we? But we never seem to make much progress, because to a great extent the problem is, one, technical, and two, we're having to work together much more. And unfortunately, I don't have the answer for you, because your dilemma is my dilemma too. Yes, we want these renewable energies, but at the same time, I've signed a protest letter against setting up certain wind facilities up there on the Canterbury coast. But I think you have brought up issues, and you've actually laid it out for me, haven't you? It's very easy. One of the biggest challenges that we're having in this transition isn't scientific or technological or financial. We have a lot of technology. We've got money as well. We always need more. And we have more know-how than ever before. The main challenge is governance, yes, how to put together those agreements between different parts of the country, between residents here and residents there, so everybody feels that they are winners in this, as Ricardo was saying, so it's fair and just. I'm not saying that this is, I want to bring this up because it matters to me, but you've worked a lot in mountain areas about this, because mountains have always been an area of the country which has been used for people. Whole valleys have been flooded, haven't they, to provide energy, electricity for certain areas. So a lot of those people living there feel that they were actually making their resources more at disposal than others for them. So what about renewable energy? Well, let's turn this around. How can we actually make sure that those infrastructures can actually bring wealth to the landscape and to the area, but at the same time protect biodiversity? Well, I don't know whether I've got the perfect answer to that. No, there won't be a perfect answer, but we'll have to actually get things wrong, won't we? Yes, but we'll have to get things wrong together. We need to have scientific know-how, and we need to know what we're doing and how. Quite first and foremost, I would say that restoration might be the solution, but before we do that, we have to avoid destroying or degrading our natural systems. It's not easy to restore things and put them back in place again. It's not just about planting a few plants there or taking a few animals out there. No, forests that might take 100 or 200 years to grow fully, and only then will we have that sustainable interrelationship. Then we won't have to actually go in there and help things out. So that is fundamental. And above all, we need to avoid any further deterioration, because Spain, just like other Mediterranean countries, has a huge responsibility. I think we have one of the biggest levels of endemic rate of biodiversity. I think a quarter of the flora that we have here, the flowers and plants, they aren't anywhere else. They're endemic. They're here. We have to protect them. We have to conserve them. No one's going to come in here and tell us to do that. Occasionally we get a habitat directive popping up, don't we, on the screen, and we have to comply with that. But that area, the high biodiversity rate areas, have to be maintained so we can have the sustainable tourism there, so we can keep them attractive, and we have to look after them. If we have to alter them, only do that when there is no other way of looking after them, when it's illegitimate, because we're all entitled to have a better life and better standard of living. But look at the other side of the coin. That is also our golden goose. You may know Jaca, which is in the middle of the Pyrenees. It's a little village. No, it's a little village, she says. Yes, and she's yes, from Aragon. Yes, the region. Well, for me, the vultures were something I used to see all the time in the sky. But people used to come from everywhere to come and look at them flying over, and people from Germany, all sorts of countries. We weren't aware of the fact we've got the biggest possible population of those birds. For me, it was an everyday thing. We're not aware of the natural wealth that we have, and it's our responsibility to look after it. Nobody else is going to look after it. Either we do it or we'll lose it, and we have to sell what we've got to the outside world. Otherwise, we'll lose it. The golden goose will kill them. Oh, Jaca, yes. There is, I think, the great buzzard, I think, isn't it? Or there's one of these other big birds that we have the conservation centres for. You were talking about the fact that we have to do things better, we have to be more engaged. What can citizens do to protect biodiversity? Well, it's amazing. I think all these citizens projects are on the up, but because we have a society that's keen to have free time, and I think you can just use technology. You can act, can't you? You can actually pick up this information on the screen, or you can go out there on a weekend and have fun doing all of this. If we can coordinate that, if we can organize that, that has amazing potential. The amount of information that people, ordinary people, are collecting, but in coordination is amazing. But we need to coordinate that and make sure we analyze all the scientific data that's collected. No government could ever pay for that. The amount of work that's been done by these nature conservation groups, these NGOs. And I always say this: the future biodiversity isn't in the hands of scientists. There's just a handful of us, and we haven't time to do much. It's in their hands, provided they're coordinated, provided they're working with managers, private companies, and with scientists.
Miguel, what Begoña was saying about this extremely important role of citizens when an older person joins a group of volunteers like this one, which is out data collecting or doing whatever, how does their life change, and how does their perception of biodiversity and nature change? Well, I guess it depends on what they do, but in many cases it will. As some of the girls explained today, you only have to look at the sea and start to collect plastic to realize that there's a problem. And then the dolphins, and then the dolphins are not looked after, and so you become increasingly aware and sensitive of the importance of these problems. So, and then you have to pass it on to others. You have to convince others. When we were saying earlier, I think it was also the chairwoman, about the need for a change of paradigm. I think for many centuries, we were working to see how we might exploit resources ever more efficiently. And I found it pretty frightening when they said, you have to get creative, you have to make more. Well, no, let's not get any more creative about getting more out of the earth. We need to now get innovative about restoring it and regenerating it. That's what we need to explain to citizens. It's not just about the need to do things differently, but also for a different purpose. And this year, 2022, I know that it's the year of basic sciences for sustainability, and that is a radical change, because to a large extent, science and technology were being used for unsustainability, in order to extract more resources, even by polluting more. And so that's a real radical shift. And it's not easy to carry out. It's easier, of course, to keep working in order to cultivate saline soils so that we can, instead of polluting less soil with seawater. So that is a real revolution, a real change of paradigm in the way we look at things. But we are making progress, because earlier when you were saying about what was happening in your building, you said there's no progress, we're not making any progress. But actually, from the point of view of science, the fact that we're celebrating the year of basic science for conservation or for sustainability is already a significant change and an enormous shift in the scientific focus. So there is progress. Well, yeah, the fact that it's been declared as the year off, of course, it sounds great, but those of us who are older, perhaps because we're more pessimistic, because we think we won't live to see it, feel that it's not moving fast enough. Yes, but there have been changes, I think, and perhaps not moving fast enough, that's true. And science is saying that we're running out of time because we're not moving fast enough. But we are, I think, making progress. It's important to remember that. And of course, we are all here on the same page. I don't think anybody here is going to question the things we're hearing here. But Ricardo, beyond this room, beyond this hall, there might be a lot of people who say, well, that all sounds great and it's very nice, but we do need to grow crops, and we need the marshland and the salt and the saline soil to be as productive as possible, because that's how we make a living. And that's where we get that great dilemma and discussion about the concept of sustainability itself. And we're all sick and tired of hearing about it and discussing it, but it's about the economy and the environment and social. So Ricardo, is it possible to achieve a real balance of those three things? You're an expert. I know you've worked well beyond the boundaries of your own field, and you've given a lot of thought to this. Is it really possible to strike that balance? Well, I'd say that climate change is a factor that is causing imbalance and inequality. So if we don't make progress, we will see growing social inequality. I'll give you an example. One of the hardest hit areas of the world by climate change is the sub-Saharan belt. If things go on as they are right now, that's going to have tremendous geopolitical implications, because there will be a much wider belt of poverty than we have today, and that's going to mean tremendous migration flows, even more than we have now. And so it's not one thing or the other. It's just that unless we reestablish the environmental or climate balance, we are going to see outbreaks of inequality and social and economic crises. Having said that, and I'm running out of time, actually, we're out of time, and it went so fast, but let me ask all three of you a question that you should answer briefly. But I'd like to say something about this. Earlier, I think I said at the beginning that well-being, that's a trick question. As I said, oh, do we have to make sacrifices and sacrifice our well-being? Well, no. We just have to think that we can be just as well, live just as well, without buying so many things or giving so many Christmas gifts or eating meat so many days a week. And you can still be living well and happily with fewer things. And the system we live in encourages us to want a lot of more things to be happy. And that's a habit we need to break, radically change that. We need to be happy with less. But there's another trap, which is to say we need to grow more food in salt marshes and what have you, because there's going to be more and more people living in the world, 10 billion people, as Mario said earlier. But that's actually wrong too, because as you've often said, it's actually a governance issue. We're already producing more than enough food to go around. It's just that we're throwing it away. And right now, we are growing more than enough food for 10 billion people, but we're throwing them away. In order to grow that food or to produce that food, in farming and agriculture, we're using 75% of drinking water and 30-some% of the land and 20-some% of global emissions. And so we just really need to manage things better. We need to manage the use we make of the resources we produce. We need to educate ourselves to eat apples, even though they're not perfect looking, so they don't get thrown away, because they can only sell the perfect looking ones. And we need to eat less meat, because each cow eats a kilogram of cow meat means 20 or 30 kilos of cereal, which we could eat ourselves, and tremendous quantities of water too. So we can do that already without reducing our quality of life, whilst reducing our footprint and the impact on biodiversity. Well, that's actually a really interesting discussion, because Miguel Delibes is saying we can do that without worsening our quality of life. I actually think we would improve our quality of life, because our diet will be healthier and more balanced and broader, with greater diversity of food. And so actually now we are eating too much meat. I don't say you shouldn't eat meat. I'm just saying we're eating too much meat and therefore not trying other types of food and having a more balanced diet, which doctors are always telling us is a lot healthier. So it's not a sacrifice. It would actually be an improvement. Or if we didn't drive a car every day to go to work, wherever possible. Of course, it's not always possible, but in small cities, they say, I don't want to live to Madrid or to wherever, because then I would have to use the car every day. I'd have to use the car every day to go to work, to take my kids to school, whatever. So that's a burden to have to use a private car every day. So it's not a sacrifice. It's actually improving our quality of life wherever possible. And of course, that's where you need public investment and science and technology to make things convenient and easy and comfortable. But it's not a sacrifice. It's actually going to be an improvement. I was just thinking of something which is kind of funny, but in a book, I forget the authors, Australian authors, who said about what's really sustainable. And jokingly they said, you have to choose between having a car and a dog, because a dog contributes as much to global warming a year as a car. They explain with their calculations, because dog food is also, or cat food or whatever, is part of the food that could be distributed amongst those billions of people who are going to come. And so the title of the book, I remember, was The Time Has Come. Has the time come to eat the dog? A treatise on true sustainability or something like that. Okay, we've run out of time, but I do want to close with a note of hope. There are proposals and possibilities to get on the right track. So 20 seconds each. Tell me what your first action, or the first action or the key aspect that you think we would need in order to manage climate change and the crisis of biodiversity. Begoña, I'm going to start with you since you're right here. Just a headline. Well, I think that after emerging from the pandemic, we need to reconnect with nature. So it's an absolutely ideal moment to make people more aware of the fact that we're all in the same boat. It doesn't matter whether some of you are on a luxury yacht cabin and the others are on deck. We're all in the same boat. If the boat sinks, we're all going under. And so it's time to pull together and make this a coordinated effort of everyone in society. Thank you, Begoña. Ricardo? Well, we can combine the title of two Beatles songs. Say, The Long and Winding Road, which is the road that we have ahead. It is long and winding, but with the help of my friends. So the more of us that contribute, the easier it will be to cross that long and winding road. Great. See, there's always a chance to find a way. And well, I was really happy to listen to those young girls who spoke here. And it's crucial to empower young people, to give them more of a voice and more room for agency in our society, since they are aware of the fact that they are the last generation that's going to have a chance to really change the world. And something that I learned, and which we've heard a lot about, the importance of the role of women in Rio in '92. Perhaps that was what most impressed me at the Rio summit I attended that year, and that is that the women of the world had to be empowered, not just in developed countries, because there are millions, dozens of millions of children, unwanted children, being born a year, used as labor, free labor, to help their households, because women did not have the means to prevent those births. And so in Rio they said the future is in the hands of women, and I think it's very true. Well, thank you very much, all three, and thank you for leaving us with these notes of hope for the future. And of course, we've discussed a lot of different topics here. I think we've covered absolutely every possible topic. As always happens when we talk about sustainability and biodiversity and the fight against climate change. And now I think we can move right to the next panel. Big round of applause for them.
Bueno, pues seguimos adelante.
Well, let's keep going with our last panel session today. Thank you very much to the three panelists before that, Ricardo, Miguel, and Maria Begoña. Thank you for your input. Food. I was quite struck by that topic that came up. It's true that there is a task force of scientists working very hard, and they've been doing it for a number of months on trying to turn plastic into food, because plastic is eaten by bacteria, and it's almost like a slaughterhouse of a bacteria, and then you can take advantage of it and turn it into protein. We've heard from the young girls today about that idea of circular economy and the idea of plastic becoming food. Well, we'd have plenty of food for us, wouldn't we? Particularly in those areas where there is a food scarcity there. Let's talk about the economy and nature now in this last panel session. I think you covered pretty much everything, didn't you? You ran right through all of those topics that we need to touch on, and they all seem to link up. Now we're going to talk about another very important subject. As I said, this last panel session has more to do with the economy and nature. We'll talk about both because they are linked. There are other related ideas, aren't there? Climate change is one, and biodiversity destruction. So to talk about these subjects, we have some panelists linked to all of those three areas. We have with us Fernando Valladares with us. Fernando, how are you? Nice to see you. Of course, scientific researcher, that's important. And as the input, we also have Diego Bezcaina to talk to us about the economy. Hi. Susana Pinaroma will be with us. She's head of ESG integration at DWS Investment GmbH. As you heard in the opening statement from the chairperson, unfortunately we can't have with us today Emilio Ontiveros. It would have been lovely to have had him. It's Diego is here representing him, but we know that he would have been a great motivating force, and now we're talking about solutions. Go ahead, all of you. Thank you very much, Mario, for that word of remembrance about Emilio Ontiveros. So he discovered for a lot of us the secrets of the economy. He knew it back to front. But he was one of the very first people in the world who, from the world of academia and the economy and the economics, started to understand what Mario was saying. We're taking for granted that there is this linkage between economics or the economy and nature and biodiversity. That it's all part of the same thing. Emilio Ontiveros was one of the very first people to understand that the economy depends on the biosphere. Of course, if it's healthy, then you will have a healthier economy. And if you have a biosphere that is ill, then your economy will run into difficulties. Diego, you were very fortunate to be able to talk or work with him. And yes, of course, it's up to me now to defend his legacy. We know that you will do that with absolute conviction. In the previous panel, we were talking about climate change and biodiversity and how they go hand in hand, and how that affects the likelihood of survival of species on the planet. Now we're going to turn our gaze to another angle. It also is something we need to pay attention to. We haven't always done that. That is how climate change is something that we have to engage with as a society. Naomi Klein wrote a book on this. This changes everything with climate change. And I don't think we were really quite aware of how everything means everything. We sometimes think it's just about nature. Sometimes we say, okay, it's about living beings or the health. And by the way, according to the Carlos III Institute estimates, we have some initial approaches there over the last year. So September 2021 to September 22, 6,000 deaths were caused by extreme high temperatures. 6,000. Related to, I'm not saying directly linked to, there may have been some underlying condition there that may have been aggravated by those high temperatures. So that's one thing. But I don't think we've ever really emphasized the social side and how we in society can see change there. We're seeing that, of course, that climate change makes us poorer. It makes us more unequal, and this is something that's come up throughout all of the panel sessions, and also something that generates more social conflicts, which often have to do with that battle for ever scarcer resources. We're thinking about water today. It could be energy, though. It could even be the territory, the land itself. So I'd like to delve into these topics in this panel session, climate change and how it changes everything and how it changes the economic model as well. Fernando Valladares, you are a research professor at the Higher Science Centre here. We see you on the media all the time, don't we, and the radio and television. But I think you have really got to grips with the way society feels about these questions. Because you're always talking to young people, to professionals, to students, with all sorts of people. Do you think we are fully aware now about the relationship that exists between the climate change crisis and the state of our economy? Yes, I think so. Nevertheless, there are still some obstacles in our way for that to become something that is absolutely tangible. For instance, I think we could sum it all up in one word: miracle. We have two generators of miracles and one receiving. The two producers or the generators are politicians in the private sector. And who benefits from them or receives them? So it's the societies, the general public is dying for those who's desperate for them. And here we pop in as scientists and say we don't believe that in miracles. That just as when the nuclear energy is seen by the European Union Commission as something that's green, and we're saying we don't believe an octopus can bid either. So climate change, people ask, won't change my life much, will it? And I answer yes, but who really answers yes there? I became popular, shall I say, with a headline that said, Europe's desert cannot be Europe's vegetable garden. But who's going to go off and tell areas like Murcia and La Maria, where they have these vegetable gardens there? And people rang me up and they said, we're very careful about how much water we use. I said, I'm sure you do. But somebody might have come up with the idea that the desert could be the best place to grow vegetables and fruits. So these are two opposing worlds. We're obviously seeing that the world of miracles is losing ground, but we're always reinventing them, aren't we? We'll see that this winter, won't we? Let's see, there'll be institutions and people and technologies in there too quite often. The people who work miracles would like to actually get in bed with those technologies, hydrogen, for instance. What about us using existing technologies? I think that we underuse existing technologies and we don't use people-based or nature-based solutions that we already have and that we know are much more efficient, but they're not exciting, are they? They're not headline topics, and they're not the big dominant solution that we're all expecting, hope. And we know that the people who have to finance them and they may want to get voted in the next time, that they're the big words that they need to use. That's the big problem. It's not that people aren't aware of how serious the situation is, but they still think that it's not too late. And the denialists say, well, we okay to climate change. We're not denying it, but it's not that urgent. So maybe technology will step in and help us. And I heard somebody on the radio who said that if I vote for him or if I fund a new technology, he'll solve the problem for us. He'll get us out of this dilemma. Well, there were lots of things there. Just one point, though. Do you think complexity has something to do with this? Of course. Let me see if I can explain what I mean. During the pandemic, we saw scientists and we saw politicians and people who had something to say about the pandemic at the time, being honest and saying, I just don't know. What will happen to the virus later? How will you manage? I don't know. We don't know. You're talking about the scientific community, yes. There is a boundary a limit to our knowledge because COVID had just appeared and we have to study it and we need to find out what to do. So perhaps on climate change, issues? It would be good to answer, I don't know, because science is saying, be careful here, watch out, because we are actually moving into unknown territory here. So if we're looking for solutions and decisions have been taken, maybe we just don't know. It's not just complexity that's a problem. Yes, of course. And one of the most complex things is our brains. It's not because we're not familiar with it in neurological terms, because there are some unpredictable areas there, such as emotions, and emotions make the world go round. You know that this makes it one of the most difficult sciences. It's not like quantum theories at all, quantum physics at all. We've had this debate ongoing for years, haven't we? Diego. But right now, this is terrifying, isn't it? Because we're in a situation that has been actually prompted by the Ukrainian war and the problem with gas. And we've seen that. We've got this mirror that we're looking into now. We're seeing through the Ukrainian war that we totally depend on fossil fuels, on gas and oil. And that reliance on dirty and perhaps not so environmentally friendly or not so products and also countries as well. So how can we resolve this? The inflationary pressure is there. How can we reconcile this? How can we actually keep onwards towards the ecological transition and with climate change and we've got the next generation, Repower EU and in Europe. How can we reconcile all of that with the war, what that will entail, and the fact that we still have to make sure that we have enough energy on this continent? Christina, I would say in answer to that just as in the pandemic, that basically all of our clothes fell off and we were left naked, stark naked. The same thing has happened, very similar in the case of the Ukrainian crisis with energy. This is something that everybody knew about. We've been talking about it for decades, but we're still waiting for that miracle, just as Fernando was mentioning, and we're just actually kicking the can down the road. And now that we have a massive geopolitical and economic tension out there, and you've mentioned inflation too. The forecast for this year is 7 to 8% in the US, 8% in the euro area next year. Maybe it'll be 4.5% in both areas of the world, so much higher than the reference targets for central banks if they're trying to actually keep a curb there on inflation. Of course, the Ukrainian crisis, the war, has actually broken our supply chains. We've also got this blockade on energy. The supply bottlenecks are more or less getting sorted out. Food is still an issue. It's a problem. It's structural. But the most circumstantial part of it is being resolved. But we still have the problem of energy. And as you said, our traditional partners, Russia, Germany has always played that card, is letting us down. And we have the other allies out there. We have the US, that there are internal political tensions there that make us see that we may have to look for some different options just in case. And then there's the OPEC decision just a few days ago, also putting more pressure on us. This isn't just about what has happened because of the Ukrainian war. This is a reality, a crude reality that has been going on for decades and we haven't seen. Just as you were talking about that heat wave this summer, we have cyclical harm that is absolutely patent there. It is undermining the purchasing power of households, the competitive edge of companies. It's affecting our GDP as well. We saw how all of the projections, the forecast, were downgraded just last week. So energy is a vector. It's a fundamental vector, and we have that reliance on certain form of energy. And it's generating this inflationary spiral, and we have to contain it. The central banks want to make sure that they don't lose face, they don't lose any credibility in their fight against inflation. How can they do that? Well, they think they will do that by really toughing up their monetary policy, and that will, of course, strangle our ability to grow in the economy and will have a big impact on companies and on households. You were mentioning that lever, that tool that we have in the economy, which is monetary policy, but there's also the fiscal policy lever that governments can wield. And it's being used, it's being wielded because there is no other option open to governments. In Europe, mitigational measures are being taken to ensure that we can actually minimize impact on households, but it doesn't come free. There are hundreds of millions of euros that are being spent on mitigating the impact on vulnerable groups in society and making sure there's access to energy. There's an arsenal of measures that is being put in place there, but you've got fiscal deficit and public debt that are the results, the outcomes. So we think it's necessary or absolutely essential to get to a scenario that will reconcile more sustainability on the economic front to how alternative sources, to allow us to have a better ability to forecast what will happen and to have less volatility. And that will be what we need essentially for growth and to be able to maintain our way of life and our well-being. That can't be funded on its own. We need to have an environment. We do have aging societies in Europe, and we need an environment in which we can use resources more cleverly, be more smart to ensure that we can prompt more growth. We can't just increase resources used for production and output. We have to have increased productivity and use it as a vector for growth. Essentially, we have to change the way we've been doing things because it can't be sustainability from the economic point of view or the climate point of view.
You said governments have two tools, fiscal policy and monetary policy, but the way they're being used, of course, they are putting us in a situation we don't like, but of course also the war has shifted us from the decarbonization roadmap we were on, with contradictions such as subsidies on diesel or gasoline, when just a few months ago they were thinking about withdrawing all the fiscal and tax incentives on these fuels because the OECD and the EU were saying that it was taking us too long to withdraw those incentives and those subsidies. And now with the war, of course, we find ourselves dealing with these contradictions. But there's something, Begoña, which underlies all this, or sorry, Susana, underlying all this, and it has to do with funding, how this lubricant of the whole economic system sometimes keeps things as they are or brings about change. And speaking about finance, investors for many years now have been very focused on green investment, green finance, ESG-driven finance, and in a context like the one Diego was just describing, and which we've all been analyzing. Are ESG investments still growing? How is that market behaving? And another crucial matter, which I think everyone's thinking about, what can be done to make sure those ESG investments truly follow ESG criteria without there being any inkling of greenwashing or anything like that? Well, that's quite a challenging question. Of course, there's lots of things at play here. I would say in terms of finance, it's true that we hadn't really talked about the topic yet today, but investors do play a crucial role in this whole transformation, which means not just changes in regulations, as we've been seeing in the last 2 years, but it also means for investors increasing awareness in different parts of society. And that also requires training and education because of everything you've been saying, greenwashing, ESG. It sounds small, but if you actually start thinking about all the indicators we have available to measure the performance of companies in ESG metrics, I could say that in our database for every company, we have over 3,000 indicators. And so what I mean is that, of course, it starts with awareness, and we know that not every human being move equally fast, nor are all equally motivated to learn a new way of doing things. We've talked about transformation, and the way an analyst or a portfolio manager operates also needs to change, because first thing we need to do is to see what our clients want. They're the investors, and what regulators are demanding, and then how somebody who had traditionally been doing an analysis of fundamentals without considering these factors has to start taking them into account practically overnight. And speaking about, well, child labor or human rights infringement, perhaps also more to do with climate change, it's not enough, as some investors are saying, oh, they are signatories of a zero emission target by 2050. That's not enough. What we're doing is to measure what they're actually doing and what companies and governments are doing when speaking about sovereign debt in order to get to that target. And that requires training, which, although it has been provided for years, and I myself participate in several programs in Spain and in Europe, but in spite of that, it's not something you can achieve overnight. You need to persuade younger people who are already believers, but of course, also people of my age and older. But a lot of analysts and portfolio managers who are older are still finding it difficult to understand the role played by all these factors. And so I think in this field, it's extremely important that, since we want to achieve this balance between economy and nature in the broadest sense, we also need the support of our customers, of those investors who, luckily and thanks to regulation now, when they go to a bank and want to invest in a fund, the first thing they are asked is whether sustainability matters to them, which means that, and I think that's the transformation that we needed to go with that training and that change in the investment world, is to think of our clients, the retail investors, understanding that they want us to invest in a sustainable fund that really considers all of these criteria. And perhaps something we need to think about personally ourselves with our savings. It's not about going to your bank and being offered a sustainable product. I think if we really want to achieve this balance, impact investment is something that still needs a lot of development. And impact investment outside liquid funds does exist and is important, but if we want a real transformation, if we really want investors to move faster and to change faster, we need investors to demand not just a particular yield for a certain risk level, but also to be shown the impacts that have been achieved with that investment. And to do that, this takes us back to Redella or Red Eléctrica and to all businesses. We need data as investors showing what impacts companies are having. If we have sufficient high-quality data, and that's really the biggest challenge, disclosure, we'll be better able to design those funds and to sell them because there's demand for them. But in the meantime, we will be caught between the companies, the regulators, the final investors, and our fiduciary responsibility, which is to provide that yield, that risk-adjusted yield, and at the same time to achieve what we all want, which is a more sustainable world. And actually, Susanna, do you think the war has changed that? Because I think 3 years ago was that first letter from the BlackRock CEO, which changed the world, basically telling companies and funds to get out of the brown economy and start investing in the green economy. That's basically what happened. And so there were these huge inflows into these areas and outflows from the brown economy. But then today, he himself, this year, after the Ukraine war, corrected that and said, well, okay, investing in green bonds and in green finance and in sustainable investments is all very well, but maybe we're moving too fast. So how has that really worked in the sector? Well, of course, everybody can have an opinion, if we look at Europe, that possibility doesn't exist, because with all the regulatory changes we've had these years past, in order for a fund to be defined as sustainable, it has to have two characteristics. First, to prove that you are considering what are called the principal adverse incidents or impacts, which are these metrics in the areas of emissions, water, waste, social issues, to prove that you're considering those, which means that, for example, in emissions, they are being considered and we are trying to reduce them. And secondly, we have, well, it's not voluntary really, but the quantity is voluntary. You have to say in each fund you are managing which percentage of that fund is being invested in companies that are aligned with the taxonomy, where we don't really have data yet. And in order to do that, until we have the data on companies' alignment with the taxonomy based on what is called regulatory sustainability, which is Article 217 of the ESDR, which means we don't have choices. We have to explain how we take those principal adverse impacts into account and also prove that we're going to achieve that minimum percentage of alignment that we have committed to. And so we will have to find a balance there, of course, and that's probably the balance that we're trying to reach through our engagement efforts, which are our attempt to influence companies and encourage them to go in the right direction. And perhaps in the oil sector, which we shouldn't really be investing if we only took into account the transition process, but to only support those companies which, through our engagement efforts, we can see are taking steps to really reach those targets. And in the meantime, to gradually, sort of, as we all are, help drive that transition, but being very demanding with those companies that are not taking those steps, and there are such companies. And of course, making this clear and not allowing any backtracking also means that the economic world has to be aware of the opportunities that exist in this field. I don't know whether this has been done by companies because we are thinking about the war and all it means, but we also have an opportunity to build a new energy model. We have a lot of opportunities in the whole environmental and energy transition. But a few months ago, when it seemed that we were leaving the pandemic behind and so on, we were all thinking about the opportunity for Europe and for European businesses of onshoring again, so that we can become more independent from these distant logistic chains and so on. Are companies exploring that opportunity, or are they finding it difficult to do so? Well, no, I do think that now there's more awareness of the opportunity and timeliness of this, because for many decades we were thinking about costs and how to avoid the impacts of certain business practices affecting us, and well, what we did was to offshore them, and we've now realized that that had its risks and its limitations, the limits of globalization. As a result of everything that's been happening in the last few years, we are rethinking whether we had gone too far and whether our strategic dependence, which we saw during the pandemic with some health care materials, are also there in a lot of industrial sectors. And now we are seeing opportunities to develop a re-onshoring process, promoting certain economic activities within our own borders. And technology, and this is not a miracle, Fernando. In some cases it is, kind of is, but in others this is already very real, to consider projects even linked to mature heavy industry. I'm thinking of the iron and steel industry or cement or the chemical sector, which represent about a fifth of global emissions, or Europe's CO2 emissions, and job numbers which had been very high and which had been decreasing in the last decades. And now we see that there are ways of transforming those processes without Europe having to get rid of those activities. They could happen here, create jobs here, without having a negative environmental impact or excessive emissions. So there is, I think, an opportunity to create jobs and drive economic growth with solid, large investment projects, taking advantage, I would say, of some of Europe's strengths in terms of scientific potential, but also the human capital we have here. And so I think perhaps it could be our way to compete effectively in this global scenario where we are increasingly caught between the tensions between the US and China, and I think Europe could have a big say. I think it's the first time we talk of China in the whole afternoon. Well done.
Sí, la verdad.
Yes, Fernando, I saw you wanted to come in. Yes, and I can see that time's running out, and because we have to do this thinking, I think instead of giving lots of facts and figures, I would ask you a question. I asked myself this question: why aren't we delivering on the 2030 agenda? And I'm wondering whether we're going to do this in a bit of a way like teenagers, leave it for the day before the exams. So maybe that we will eradicate poverty. We will do everything in the last day of the year, 2029. No. So why aren't we actually complying with universal human rights? They're underpinning this agenda. Kofi Annan years ago said that universal rights. It was very hard for us to actually get those on paper. They're not there just to comply with them, and to use them to be enriched by them, and that's what was put into the 2030 agenda. It's a wonderful agenda. Of course, it's a wonderful agenda because its foundations are the universal human rights. And I have an answer to that question. At some point, the economy got in the way. The economy actually got into human rights. There will be 8 billion of us in 8 days' time. Yeah, that's the new demographics for us. In just a couple of weeks, there will be 8 billion of us. There are so many of us, and we're going to actually break two important things on the planet: energy and food. We get those resources, but how do we get them? By really just destroying those natural processes. But we can do that with the carbon cycle. For instance, we're releasing very quickly carbon that took millions and millions of years to actually be stored in the form of oil, and we can actually sequester nitrogen from the air, so we can produce lettuces and tomatoes, and we can produce that food. Can we be proud of that? I'm not sure, because the outcome of that, the effect of that, is that we're producing energies and we're producing food, and it's all turned into business. We've forgotten the fact that we need energy and we need to eat. These are fundamental rights. We've forgotten completely about that. Why? Because the economy's there. Right. So we have to make money with this as well. And as we're making money, we can also provide energy, and we can give people food on the table. But in essence, that's what it is. And when we finally realize that, we will be able to transform the society. But as we're sitting back here waiting for miracles to appear, we're looking for another energy model. But why do we need another energy model? We don't need one. We need to actually use less energy. It's a verb. Use less, because in Spain we have twice the amount of energy we actually need to be healthy and happy. In Europe we have 3 times the amount we need, and in the US they have 5 times the amount of energy they need. What we need to do is redistribute the energy we've got, and when the energy plants that are coming out today are for 6 to 9 times the amount of the energy that we need. It's always renewable, of course, always renewable. So 6 to 9 times more than what we actually need. And if we multiply that by two, we have double what we need. So we're talking about 12 times the amount of energy that we need to be healthy and happy, which are our fundamental human rights. That's what Kofi Annan said. Economists over there? Are there any in the room? Yes, I don't want to answer the question. I think what Fernando was saying is true, but you mentioned human rights there, but that tension that you're outsourcing everything that's environmental and everything that's social. We've taken the environmental side of this to its absolute limit. The same goes for social issues as well. We've just look at what's happened in politics. Think about Brexit, what's happening in France. Just right now, what's happened in the US. They're knocking on our doors. And to paraphrase Emilia, inequality is not profitable, and it's not functional either. It doesn't work. Societies don't work like that. So I think we're coming to a absolute realization that we need to work these things. I disagree with you. The economy isn't something that runs counter to what you're talking about, but we need to make better use of scarce resources. That is what the economy means. And by the way, the ecology is there. It's the same root of the word. So any change in the economy would need us to be giving better signs, investing better, and better managing the resources in the public sector, and convey to the private sector the right regulatory signals for investments made in the right way to be able to strike that balance and get that equality. I talked before about predictability and less volatility. I don't think we can cope with more of that, can we? So we have to invest in that type of practice to be able to get back onto the track of greater stability and sustainability as well as the economy. The problem is that the economy has come onto the scene now, but we brought it on board. We need to ensure that there's better distribution of resources, better management of the resources. Now, if we brought the economy, the word economy, better into our idea of development, we wouldn't have the externalities that you're talking about now. So maybe we have to change this concept around the way we talk about economy. I know you were talking about bad economic policies, aren't you? I'm talking about economic growth as the bar to measure success and development. I don't think any economist would ever thought that GDP could describe our well-being. It doesn't do anything except for describing something in economic terms, but we're all waiting for the news to them to say GDP is growing. No, it mustn't grow anymore. We need to grow in happiness, in health, and equality, and other more intangible values, not in short-term monetary values. In the end of the day, they will make us happier and richer. Do you think everyone is waiting to watch the news to see whether the economy has grown, Susanna? Perhaps one final comment, if I could. The 2030 agenda is such an important point. If we really do want to get that balance between the economy and the impact there of the agenda, I think that's what we all want. If we could get transparency there in the business world, so we knew how all of the companies are making a contribution to the SDGs, it would be easy for all of us too, because we would be able to actually see things fairly and take decisions not just based on performance, so you were talking about the economic side, but we'd also be able to see how companies are making their contribution to all of those sustainable development goals. And that there has been a good change over recent years. We do have an internal rating system that helps us to measure that, and it's what we use as well for that taxonomy on sustainability investment. So we don't have any other information, but when companies start to give us that information, we will be able to support that process towards greater balance, to strike the balance between performance and impact. You don't have to convince us scientists about this. We work with data. We want to be clear-cut about things. And when I propose to some big companies who've asked me for advice on this, how can we measure sustainability, and they just barely pass, I say transparency. But when we get further into this, at first everyone says, oh yes, transparency. But when you really scratch the surface of the word transparency, companies actually confess, I'm not going to say which companies, that oh no, this is privileged information that has been given to the competition if we give us that information. No, don't stop there. This is a very interesting argument. Do we want transparency or clarity? I think we want spotlights here because clarity comes later. No, it's not the same thing. First transparency, and then we will see clarity. Then we get the lights on. Do you believe that transparency first? Yes. And then we see if things are clear or not. But the important thing is for things to be clear, but not so clear always, because transparency sometimes gives us the same information, but from different paths. And if we can't benchmark and compare companies properly, then it's difficult for us to decide where to allocate capital. I believe more in clarity than transparency. I agree with you, it's important. I used to. I remember. Do you remember those CPUs when I was a student? I mean, we only those CPUs. They're the box for the computer that we used to have on our desk, and we used to show a slide in class, and you could see that CPU was like box, and we showed it as transparent, and we said, "Is that clear?" No, it's transparent. It is, but nobody knows what it means. It's not clear because of all the mix of cables inside, and quite often that's the case. It's transparent, and I can show you, and I can put it on the website. But what we need is transparency and clarity to compare things. Yes, we would be delighted if that happened. If you could do that overnight as investment, you'd save us doing some work. With time's running out again. These panel sessions, they've just flown by. Once again, as I said in the previous panel, I think we need to seek and pinpoint the key issues. Can you do that for us? A couple of key giveaways or takeaways there. As Fernando was saying, how can we understand that whether sustainability has to bring in the real world economic situation and going back to the economy with the root of the word, how can we bring those worlds together? They are interdependent, aren't they? You've got the economy as reliant on the biosphere, but this is such a difficult, tricky economic, social, political time now. Who's going to start? I will. I like women like that. I have to take notes because otherwise I won't have time to run through all what I say. I think there are four things, four different stakeholder groups. One, regulators. They need to demand more and have more clarity on what they want to see in the market. Two, I said this before, the final investor, the end investor who wants to see impact and not just performance, and not just as a consumer but as an investor. Three, analysts who are seeking a way of integrating all of these ESG issues in their valuation methods. I think, and I'm going to be diplomatic here, I think they have to be more developed. There's a lot of upside for improvement. Yes, a lot of upside for improvement, but they are some way along the road. And lastly, companies, businesses, things we're here so that we can see their transparency and clarity. They can show us what they are achieving domestically and internationally with their performance. Thank you so much, Susana. Diego, I would say, going back to that idea of economy being about better managing resources and how the public policies have to be done differently, I would say it's a need now. I think our walls, the retaining walls, have crumbled, and now we've got inflation, low growth, and we have to get away from all of that and find a positive track forward. And see it as an opportunity. Europe believes in this, and Spain, in particular, has this opportunity to renew its capacity to grow and to create jobs and create interesting projects for business. I believe that's true. That's interesting. Be optimistic, please. Really? Yes. In fact, until yesterday, I've spent the whole life trying to understand these things about you can't see the trees for the forest. But I think the forest for the trees surely should be, yes, sustainable development, circular economy, the three R's or the three G's or the 5 J's or the five, it's 5 J's, isn't it? And 5 G's, isn't it? All of these, these are concepts, so we can't see the forest, can we? The forest, what is it? It's a society that works, and provided the citizens undertake to deliver on the human rights that underpin it. Forget about the market, about short-termists, etc. Human rights contain everything. Just look at them. That is the forest that I think we can't see because of so many concepts. We've got words and we've got miracles which distract us. I think this is back to basics, isn't it? It's time for us to go back to all of those things. He's reminded us of human rights. Yes, I agree with you totally, though. I think we've discussed things like this for a long time now. Now we're doing it with you as the audience. But yes, the philosophy of human rights is all about this. It's about us having a better life today and people in the future. Sustainability, too. Papers and academia are doing all of these pseudo-analysis of the issue, but when you actually delve into it and get to the essence of it, it's about having better lives and living better, and all of us, not just a few of us, and those of us who are living on the planet now and who will come after us. So thank you very much for taking us back to those basics and those basic principles. It's good to remember them, because as a society we feel proud of them, and if we do feel proud of them, it would be easier for us to defend them and advocate them and incorporate them into what we're doing. Thank you very much. A round of applause.
Okay, well, that was the last panel and the end of today's session. I just want to thank everyone for being here. I think we've heard some really interesting things in this last panel session. We've heard about some really interesting and crucial things, of course, and I'm not going to summarize it all because there's so much information that it would take me a really long time. I just want to thank Redeia for the invitation, because I myself have learned a lot, even though this is my field. And whenever you get a chance to sit down and listen to experts and listen to opinions, particularly in the financial world and investment world. So thank you very much for being here. And I think that now you've earned yourselves a drink. So outside, there's some wonderful Spanish wine waiting for you. And I hope that this winter will bring us what we all need. Thank you.